Greetings, brave warriors and shield maidens. If you seek the strength and wisdom of the ancient Vikings, you've come to the right place. Don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and join our horde to strengthen this community of true Vikings. As you can see, our channel is new, so your subscription is crucial to our growth. If you're a true fan of the Vikings, show your support. Let the power of the Viking axe guide your hand to click the like button, and in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from so we know where in the world our stories are reaching, all because the icy winds of the Norwegian fjords whipped through Rollo's long braided hair as he stood at the edge of the cliff, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the horizon. The year was 860 AD, and the world was ripe for the taking. At just 18 summers old, Rollo already towered over most men, his broad shoulders and muscular frame a testament to years of training and hard labor. The village of Ålesund lay nestled below, a collection of wooden longhouses and smoky hearths. The scent of salt and fish hung in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of pine forests that cloaked the surrounding mountains. In the harbor, longships bobbed gently, their dragon-headed prows facing the open sea, as if yearning for adventure. Rollo's younger brother, Gurrim, scrambled up the path to join him. "Brother," he called out, slightly out of breath, "Father's looking for you. The raid party is almost ready to leave." Rollo turned, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "About time. I was beginning to think they'd leave without us." As they made their way down to the village, the brothers passed by the great hall where their father, Rognvald, held court as the local jarl. The sound of laughter and the clinking of drinking horns spilled out into the crisp morning air. "You're not nervous, are you?" Gurrim asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Rollo scoffed. "Nervous? This is what we were born for, little brother. The gods themselves cry out for us to seek our fortune across the seas." They entered the hall where warriors were gathering, checking their weapons and adjusting their armor. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. At the head of the table sat Rognvald, his graying beard neatly braided, a golden arm ring glinting on his muscular forearm. "Ah, there you are," Rognvald boomed, his voice carrying over the din. "Come, my sons, it's time you proved your worth to our people." Rollo approached, standing tall before his father. "I'm ready, father. I've been ready since I could lift an axe." Rognvald's eyes narrowed as he studied his eldest son. "Aye, you've the strength, no doubt. But raiding takes more than just muscle. It takes cunning, strategy, and above all, loyalty to your brothers in arms. Are you prepared to put the welfare of your crew before your own glory?" "I am," Rollo replied without hesitation. Though inside, ambition burned like wildfire. The Jarl nodded, satisfied. "Good. You'll be joining Hakon's crew. Listen to him. Learn from him. This is your chance to prove yourself worthy of leading your own raids one day." As the warriors filed out of the hall, a commotion near the village center caught their attention. A crowd had gathered around a small, wiry woman with wild, graying hair and eyes that seemed to peer into other worlds. "Astrid," Gurrim whispered, a mix of awe and fear in his voice. "The Völva is here." Rollo pushed his way through the crowd, drawn by an inexplicable force. As he approached, Astrid's eyes locked onto him and a hush fell over the gathering. "You," she croaked, pointing a gnarled finger at Rollo. "The seas call to you, young wolf. I see great deeds in your future, and great betrayals." Rollo felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood his ground. "What do you mean, wise one? What do the gods have in store for me?" Astrid's eyes rolled back, and she began to sway, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality. "I see a crown upon your brow, but not of this land. Across the seas a new kingdom awaits, born of fire and blood. The All-Father watches you, Rollo Rognvaldsson. Your choices will shape the fate of nations." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rollo felt the weight of their stares, a mixture of awe and suspicion. Before he could question Astrid further, a horn sounded from the harbor. It was time to leave. As the raiding party made their way to the ships, Hakon, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face and a reputation for ferocity in battle, fell in step beside Rollo. I heard what the vulva said, Hakon growled. Don't let it go to your head, boy. Prophecies have a way of leading men to their doom if they're not careful. Rollo nodded, but inside, his mind raced with possibilities. A crown, a new kingdom, the gods themselves taking notice of his fate? It was almost too much to comprehend. They boarded the longship, its wooden planks creaking beneath their feet. The air was thick with the smell of tar and rope, mixed with the salty tang of the sea. As they took their positions at the oars, Rollo could feel the excitement building in his chest. Hakon stood at the stern, his hand on the tiller. "Listen up, you dogs," he bellowed. "We sail for the rich lands to the west. The English think they're safe behind their stone walls and their cross-god. We'll show them the fury of the Northmen." A cheer went up from the crew as they pushed off from the shore. Rollo dipped his oar into the water, feeling the resistance as he pulled. With each stroke, the familiar shoreline receded, and the vast open sea beckoned. Days passed in a rhythm of rowing, sailing, and keeping watch. Rollo's muscles ached, but he reveled in the challenge. At night, huddled around the small fire brazier on deck, the men told stories of past raids and boasted of the wealth and glory they would win. On the 5th day, as dawn broke, a cry went up from the lookout. "Land ho!" Rollo rushed to the bow, straining his eyes against the misty horizon. There, emerging from the gloom, was a coastline he had never seen before. The land of the English. Hakon's voice cut through the excited chatter. "Prepare yourselves. We strike hard and fast. Remember, we're here for plunder, not a prolonged fight. Hit them before they know what's happening, and be ready to retreat to the ship at my signal." As they neared the shore, Rollo could make out a small village nestled against the cliffs. Smoke rose lazily from thatched roofs, and he could see figures moving about, unaware of the approaching danger. The longship's keel ground against the pebbly beach, and Rollo was among the first to leap into the shallow water, his axe held high. "For Odin!" he roared, his voice joining the war cries of his fellow warriors. The village erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air as the Vikings charged up the beach. Rollo's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and exhilaration driving him forward. He encountered his first opponent at the edge of the village, a farmer armed with nothing more than a rusty sword. The man's eyes were wide with terror, but he stood his ground. "Back, you heathen devil!" the farmer cried, his voice quavering. Rollo didn't hesitate. He batted aside the farmer's weak thrust and buried his axe in the man's chest. As his opponent crumpled to the ground, Rollo felt a moment of shock at the ease with which he had taken a life. But there was no time for reflection. The raid was in full swing. He moved through the village like a whirlwind, his axe rising and falling. Part of him was horrified at the destruction they were wreaking, but another part, a darker, more primal part, reveled in the carnage. As he kicked down the door of a small hut, Rollo came face to face with a young woman clutching a baby to her chest. She looked up at him, terror etched on her face, but also a fierce determination to protect her child. For a moment, Rollo hesitated. This was not the glorious battle he had imagined. This was slaughter. "Please," the woman whispered in her strange tongue, though her meaning was clear. Before Rollo could decide what to do, Hakon's voice boomed across the village. "Back to the ship. We have what we came for." Rollo backed out of the hut, his eyes never leaving the woman and her child. As he ran back to the beach, his arms laden with stolen goods, the image of their faces burned into his memory. The longship pushed off from the shore, loaded down with plunder, and a few captives destined for the slave markets. As they rowed away, Rollo looked back at the burning village, pillars of smoke rising into the gray sky. Hakon clapped him on the shoulder. "You did well for your first raid, lad. The gods smiled on us this day." Rollo nodded, but inside he felt conflicted. The thrill of battle still coursed through his veins, but so too did a sense of unease. Was this truly the path to the grand destiny Astrid had foreseen? As the English coastline faded into the distance, Rollo made a silent vow. He would become more than just a common raider. He would carve out a legacy that would echo through the ages. The prophecy of a crown and a new kingdom beckoned, and Rollo was determined to seize his fate with both hands. Little did he know that this raid was just the first step on a journey that would take him far from the fjords of Norway, across treacherous seas, and into the heart of a new empire. The saga of Rollo, the Sea King, had only just begun. The year was 865 AD, and the air in the Danish camp was thick with anticipation. 5 years had passed since Rollo's first raid, and in that time, he had grown from a promising young warrior into a formidable fighter with a reputation for both strength and cunning. Now at 23, he stood among the greatest gathering of Norse warriors the world had ever seen, the great heathen army. Thousands of men from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden had answered the call of the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, seeking vengeance for their father's death at the hands of the Northumbrian king Ella. The air buzzed with a mixture of languages and dialects, all united by a common thirst for glory and plunder. Rollo made his way through the sprawling encampment, passing by warriors sharpening their weapons and adjusting their armor. The scent of roasting meat mingled with the acrid smell of smoke from countless campfires. As he approached the central area where the leaders gathered, he heard a booming voice that made him pause. "Brothers, the time has come to unleash the fury of the North upon the Saxon dogs." Rollo pushed through the crowd to get a better view. There, standing atop a wooden platform, was Bjorn Ironside, one of Ragnar's sons and a leader of the great army. His wild hair and beard framed a face etched with battle scars, and his eyes blazed with an almost manic intensity. "Too long have we contented ourselves with mere raids," Bjorn continued. "Now we come not just to plunder but to conquer. We will carve out kingdoms for ourselves in this rich land, and our names will echo through the ages." A roar went up from the assembled warriors, and Rollo found himself swept up in the fervor. This was what he had been waiting for, a chance to prove himself on a grand stage, to take the first steps toward the destiny the vulva had prophesied. As the crowd began to disperse, Rollo felt a hand clap him on the shoulder. He turned to see Hakon, his old raid leader, grinning at him. "Well, if it isn't the young wolf," Hakon said. "I hear you've made quite a name for yourself these past few years." Rollo nodded, clasping Hakon's forearm in greeting. "I've learned from the best. But this is something else entirely." Hakon's expression grew serious. "Aye, it is. This isn't just another raid, Rollo. We're about to change the face of Britain forever. Are you ready for that?" Before Rollo could answer, a commotion near the edge of the camp caught their attention. Shouts and the clash of steel rang out, and both men instinctively reached for their weapons. "What now?" Hakon growled. "If these fools start killing each other before we even reach the battlefield, I'll feed them to the crows myself." They rushed toward the source of the disturbance, pushing through a growing crowd of onlookers. In a cleared space, two men circled each other, swords drawn. One was a hulking Dane, his arms covered in intricate tattoos. The other was leaner, quicker on his feet, with a shock of red hair, unmistakably a Norseman. "Enough!" Bjorn's voice boomed across the clearing. He strode into the makeshift arena, his presence immediately commanding respect. "What is the meaning of this?" The Danish warrior spat on the ground. "This Norse dog insulted my honor. He claims his people are the true Vikings, that we Danes are nothing but farmers playing at war." Bjorn's eyes narrowed as he looked at the red-haired Norseman. "Is this true?" The man stood his ground, chin raised defiantly. "I spoke only the truth. We are the ones who have kept the old ways while these Danes grow soft in their fertile lands." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Rollo could sense the tension building. If this wasn't handled carefully, it could tear the army apart before they even reached English soil. Bjorn seemed to sense it too. He looked between the two men, then out at the gathered warriors. Finally, his gaze settled on Rollo. "You there," he called out. "I've heard of you. Rollo, isn't it? The one they call the young wolf." Rollo stepped forward, heart pounding. "Yes, my lord." Bjorn gestured to the two would-be combatants. "What do you make of this dispute?" Rollo took a deep breath, aware that his next words could shape his future in this army. "My lord, both men speak from pride in their people, but they forget a crucial truth. We are all sons of the North. Dane, Norse, Swede. These distinctions mean nothing to our enemies. They see us only as the fury from beyond the sea." He paused, looking around at the assembled warriors. "Our strength lies not in our differences but in our unity. The Saxons tremble not because we are Danes or Norsemen, but because we are Vikings. Let us save our blades for our true enemies." A moment of silence followed his words. Then Bjorn threw back his head and laughed. "Well spoken, young wolf. It seems the tales of your wisdom are not exaggerated." He turned to the two warriors. "You heard him. Sheathe your swords and shake hands. We have real battles ahead of us." Reluctantly, the men complied. As the crowd began to disperse, Bjorn approached Rollo. "You have a way with words, Rollo. That could be as valuable as your skill with an axe in the days to come. Walk with me." As they strode through the camp, Bjorn outlined the army's plans. They would strike first at East Anglia, using it as a foothold to launch attacks deeper into the Saxon kingdoms. "We're not just here for plunder," Bjorn explained. "We mean to stay to rule. The Saxons have grown soft and complacent. They've forgotten the terror our people can bring." Rollo nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. "And after East Anglia?" Bjorn's eyes gleamed. "Northumbria. We'll make King Ella pay for what he did to our father, and then the whole of England will be ours for the taking." The next morning, as dawn broke over the horizon, the great heathen army began its march. Thousands of warriors moved as one, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Rollo found himself near the front, alongside Bjorn and the other leaders. As they crested a hill, they got their first view of their target, the East Anglian town of Thetford. Smoke rose from chimneys, and in the distance, they could see people going about their daily lives, oblivious to the approaching storm. Bjorn raised his hand, and the army halted. He turned to address the warriors, his voice carrying across the ranks. "Brothers, before us lies the first step on our path to glory. The Saxons think themselves safe behind their walls and their Christian God. We will show them the error of their ways. Let them feel the wrath of Thor's hammer. Let them tremble before the sons of Odin." A deafening roar went up from the army. Rollo felt his blood surge, the thrill of impending battle coursing through his veins. As they charged down the hill toward Thetford, Rollo found himself running alongside a warrior he didn't recognize, a man with a wild beard and eyes that gleamed with battle lust. "First time with the great army?" the man shouted over the din. Rollo nodded. "Aye, but not my first battle." The man grinned, revealing several missing teeth. "Well, young wolf, let's see if you live up to your reputation. Try to keep up." With that, he sprinted ahead, letting out a blood-curdling war cry. Rollo matched his pace, determined not to be outdone. The defenders of Thetford had barely enough time to close their gates before the Viking horde was upon them. Arrows rained down from the walls, but they did little to slow the onslaught. Rollo found himself at the base of the wall, shields locked overhead with his fellow warriors, as others brought up a battering ram. The gate groaned under the repeated blows, the sound of splintering wood mixing with the shouts and screams from both sides. With a final thunderous crack, the gate gave way. Rollo was among the first to push through the breach, his axe singing as it cleaved through the air. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Rollo lost himself in the rhythm of combat, his world narrowing to the space around his axe. He fought with a fervor that surprised even himself, each fallen enemy bringing him closer to the grand destiny he craved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the blood-soaked streets of Thetford, Rollo found himself standing in the town square. Bodies littered the ground, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of smoke. Bjorn approached, his armor splattered with gore, but a triumphant grin on his face. "Well fought, young wolf. It seems the gods favor you." Rollo nodded, still catching his breath. "What now?" Bjorn's eyes gleamed with a mixture of satisfaction and hunger for more. Now? Now we show the Saxons that we're here to stay. Thetford is just the beginning. Soon, all of East Anglia will be ours, and then... He gestured broadly, taking in the burning town around them. Then we'll have a base from which to conquer all of England. As night fell, and the great heathen army settled into their newly conquered territory, Rollo found a quiet moment to reflect. He had taken another step on the path to greatness, but at what cost? The faces of the slain, both warrior and civilian, haunted his thoughts. Yet even as doubt gnawed at him, Rollo couldn't deny the exhilaration of victory, the intoxicating sense of being part of something greater than himself. The Volva's prophecy echoed in his mind, a crown, a new kingdom. As he looked out over the smoldering ruins of Thetford, Rollo knew that his journey was far from over. The conquest of East Anglia was just the beginning. Ahead lay greater challenges, fiercer battles, and the ultimate test of whether he truly had the strength and cunning to forge his own destiny in this new land. With a deep breath, Rollo steeled himself for what was to come. The great heathen army had made its mark, and he with it. The saga of the Sea King continued, written in blood across the soil of England. The year was 867 AD, and the great heathen army had carved a bloody path through the heart of England. 2 years of constant warfare had transformed the once green lands into a patchwork of scorched earth and hastily erected fortifications. The air hung heavy with the stench of death and the acrid smoke of burning villages. Rollo, now a seasoned warrior at 25, stood atop the walls of York, surveying the conquered city below. His beard had grown fuller, and a network of scars crisscrossed his arms and torso, each one a testament to hard-won battles. The Northumbrian capital had fallen to the Viking horde just days before, its king, Ella, meeting a gruesome end at the hands of Ivar the Boneless in the infamous Blood Eagle ritual. As twilight descended upon the city, Rollo's contemplation was interrupted by the approach of a familiar figure. Bjorn Ironside, his face weathered by years of combat and leadership, joined him on the ramparts. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Bjorn mused, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Who would have thought 2 years ago that we'd be standing here masters of half of England?" Rollo nodded, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. "Aye, we've come far. But at what cost? The land bleeds, Bjorn. How long can we sustain this?" Bjorn's expression hardened. "As long as it takes. We didn't come here to make friends, Rollo. We came to conquer, to carve out kingdoms for ourselves. Or have you gone soft?" Before Rollo could respond, a commotion in the courtyard below caught their attention. A group of warriors was dragging a struggling figure towards the great hall. As they drew closer, Rollo's breath caught in his throat. It was a face he hadn't seen in years, yet one he'd never forgotten. "Astrid," he whispered. The Volva, the seer who had prophesied his destiny back in Norway, looked much the same as she had that day on the cliff. Her wild hair was perhaps grayer, her face more lined, but her eyes still held that otherworldly gleam that had haunted Rollo's dreams. Without a word to Bjorn, Rollo rushed down to the courtyard. As he approached, he could hear Astrid's shrill voice rising above the din. "Unhand me, you brutes! Don't you know who I am? The gods themselves speak through me." Rollo pushed through the crowd, his voice ringing out with authority. "Release her. This woman is under my protection." The warriors, recognizing Rollo's status, immediately let go of Astrid. She stumbled forward, her eyes locking onto Rollo's face. "You," she breathed, a mixture of recognition and something else, fear, in her voice. "The wolf has grown, I see. But have you grown wise as well as strong?" Rollo felt a chill run down his spine. "Come," he said, gesturing towards the great hall. "We have much to discuss." As they entered the hall, now transformed into a Viking stronghold with trophy weapons and banners adorning the walls, Rollo ordered food and drink to be brought. Astrid sank onto a bench, her eyes never leaving Rollo's face. "Why are you here, Astrid?" Rollo asked once they were alone. How did you even find me? The old woman cackled, a sound that seemed to echo off the stone walls. Find you? Oh, my boy, I never lost you. The threads of fate bind us all, and yours shines brighter than most. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've come to warn you, Rollo. The path you walk is treacherous. I see great glory in your future, yes, but also great peril. The gods are not finished with you yet. Rollo felt a mixture of excitement and dread coursing through him. Tell me, he demanded, what do you see? Astrid's eyes rolled back, and she began to sway gently. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down Rollo's spine. I see a crown, as I did before, but it rests uneasily on your brow. A kingdom across the sea awaits, born of fire and blood. But beware, young wolf, for the price of power is high. Betrayal lurks in the shadows, and the bonds of kinship will be tested. Her eyes snapped open, fixing Rollo with an intense stare. The All-Father watches you, Rollo. Your choices will shape the fate of nations. But remember, even Odin himself paid a great price for wisdom. Are you prepared to do the same? Before Rollo could respond, the doors of the hall burst open. Bjorn strode in, flanked by several warriors. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. What's this, then? He growled. Secret meetings with witches, Rollo. I hope you're not planning any treachery. Rollo stood, placing himself between Bjorn and Astrid. This woman is a seer from my homeland. She has come with warnings and prophecies. Bjorn scoffed. Prophecies? We make our own fate with steel and courage. We don't need the mutterings of old women to tell us our destiny. Astrid cackled again, the sound sending a chill through the hall. Foolish boy, the gods laugh at your arrogance. Do you think you've come this far by your own strength alone? Bjorn's hand went to his sword, but Rollo intervened. Enough. Bjorn, please. Let her speak. What harm can it do to listen? For a tense moment, it seemed Bjorn might refuse. Then, with a grunt, he released his sword and sat heavily on a nearby bench. Fine. Let's hear what the witch has to say. Astrid's eyes seemed to glow in the flickering firelight as she addressed the assembled warriors. I see a great journey ahead, one that will take you far from these shores. The land you seek lies across the sea, a place of rivers and rich soil, but it will not be won easily. She turned to Bjorn, her voice taking on a warning tone. You, son of Ragnar, your path diverges from this one. She nodded towards Rollo. Glory awaits you, yes, but not here. Your destiny lies in the east, in lands yet unconquered. Bjorn's face darkened, but before he could speak, Astrid continued, her gaze sweeping the room. A great battle approaches, one that will test you all. The Saxons gather their strength, led by a king who bears the mark of the white horse. Steel yourselves, for the very earth will tremble with the clash of armies. As her words faded, a heavy silence fell over the hall. Rollo's mind raced, trying to make sense of the prophecy. A kingdom across the sea? A diverging path from Bjorn? And who was this Saxon king marked by a white horse? Bjorn was the first to break the silence, his voice dripping with skepticism. Pretty words, old woman, but words don't win battles or conquer kingdoms. He stood, addressing the gathered warriors. We've come too far to be swayed by superstition. Tomorrow we march south. The kingdom of Mercia awaits, ripe for the taking. Let the gods watch if they will, but it's our strength and our steel that will carve out our destiny. A cheer went up from the men, but Rollo remained silent, his eyes locked with Astrid's. As the hall emptied, the old seer approached him one last time. Heed my words, Rollo, she whispered. The path to your kingdom will not be an easy one. You will face choices that will test your very soul. Remember, the greatest leaders are those who can see beyond the battle at hand. With that, she turned and shuffled out of the hall, leaving Rollo alone with his thoughts. That night, as Rollo tried to sleep, his dreams were filled with visions of stormy seas and distant shores. He saw himself standing on the prow of a ship, a crown glinting on his head, sailing towards an unknown land. But behind him, he could hear the clash of swords and the screams of the dying, as if all the battles he had fought and would fight were condensed into a single, terrible moment. He awoke with a start, covered in cold sweat. The first light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the windows of his chamber. In a few hours, the army would march south, towards Mercia, and whatever fate awaited them there. As Rollo donned his armor and checked his weapons, he couldn't shake the feeling that he stood at a crossroads. Astrid's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the ambitions that had driven him this far. A kingdom of his own, a crown, a destiny that would echo through the ages. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. But at what cost? The faces of those he had slain, the burning villages, the broken bodies littering the battlefield, all of it weighed heavily on his conscience. Was this truly the path to greatness, or was he merely a pawn in some greater game played by the gods? As he stepped out into the courtyard, where the army was assembling for the march south, Rollo made a silent vow. He would forge his own path, guided by the prophecy but not bound by it. Whatever destiny awaited him across the sea, he would meet it on his own terms. The horns sounded, signaling the army's departure. As Rollo fell into step beside his fellow warriors, he cast one last glance back at York. Somewhere in the twisting streets, Astrid was watching, her prophecy hanging over him like a storm cloud. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and difficult choices. But Rollo, the young wolf, the future Sea King, strode forward with determination. His saga was far from over, and the greatest chapters were yet to be written. The year was 885 AD, and the world Rollo knew had changed dramatically. Nearly 2 decades had passed since the prophecy in York, and the once young Viking had grown into a formidable leader in his own right. His beard was now flecked with gray, and the scars that crisscrossed his body told tales of countless battles. The great city of Paris loomed before him, its walls stretching high along the banks of the Seine. The November air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the faint metallic tang of impending conflict. Rollo stood at the prow of his longship, one of hundreds that dotted the river, forming the vanguard of the largest Viking force ever to threaten the Frankish capital. As he surveyed the city's defenses, Rollo's mind wandered to the path that had led him here. The campaigns in England had eventually faltered, and like many of his compatriots, he had turned his attention to the rich lands of Francia. The prophecy of a kingdom across the sea still burned in his mind, driving him ever onward. A voice called out from behind him, breaking his reverie. "Rollo, the war council is gathering." He turned to see Halfdan, one of his most trusted lieutenants, standing expectantly. With a nod, Rollo followed him to the largest ship in the fleet, where the Viking leaders were assembling. The air inside the ship's tent was thick with tension and the smell of unwashed bodies. At the center stood Sigfrid and Sinrik, the nominal leaders of this massive force. Rollo took his place among the circle of jarls and chieftains, each eyeing the others with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Sigfrid, a bear of a man with a voice to match, spoke first. "Brothers, the prize we've long sought lies before us. Paris, the heart of the Frankish Empire. Take this city, and all of Francia will tremble at our feet." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering, but Rollo remained silent, his eyes fixed on the crude map spread before them. Sinrik, the more tactical of the two leaders, pointed to key locations on the map. "The city is well defended, with high walls and 2 fortified bridges. Our first task must be to isolate the city by taking these bridges." As the leaders debated strategy, Rollo's mind raced. He had seen firsthand the strength of Frankish stone walls, so different from the wooden palisades of England. This would not be a simple raid. It would be a true test of Viking might against the greatest city in Western Europe. Finally, Rollo spoke up, his voice cutting through the clamor. "The bridges are key, yes, but we must not underestimate the Franks. They have a new king, Charles the Fat, who even now marches to relieve the city. We must strike hard and fast, before his army can arrive. Sigfrid's eyes narrowed. You seem to know much about our enemies, Rollo. Perhaps too much. Where do your loyalties truly lie? The tension in the tent became palpable. Rollo stood, meeting Sigfrid's gaze unflinchingly. My loyalties lie with victory, Sigfrid. I've fought the Franks before, and I respect their strength. Underestimate them at your peril. For a moment, it seemed the two men might come to blows. Then Sinrik intervened, his voice calm but firm. Enough. Rollo speaks wisdom. We attack at dawn, focusing on the bridges. Let's show these Franks the fury of the Northmen. As the council dispersed, Rollo made his way back to his own ship. The weight of the coming battle pressed heavily upon him. This siege could be the key to fulfilling the prophecy, or it could be his downfall. Dawn broke cold and misty over the Seine. The Viking fleet surged forward, oars churning the water to foam. Rollo stood at the bow of his ship, his heart pounding with the thrill of impending battle. As they neared the first bridge, a hail of arrows and stones rained down from the Frankish defenders. Shields locked overhead. The Vikings pressed on, their ships grinding against the riverbank. Rollo was among the first to leap ashore, his axe gleaming in the pale morning light. For Odin! He roared, his voice joining the war cries of hundreds of warriors. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as the Vikings met the Frankish defenders. Rollo fought like a man possessed, his axe rising and falling in a deadly rhythm. Around him, the battle raged, men falling on both sides as the Vikings struggled to gain a foothold. Hours passed in a blur of combat. Slowly, inexorably, the Viking force pushed the Franks back, securing the bridgehead. As the sun reached its zenith, Rollo found himself standing atop the conquered bridge, surveying the chaos below. A familiar voice called out to him, Rollo, we've taken the bridge, but the Franks are regrouping for a counterattack. He turned to see Halfdan, bloodied but alive, pointing towards the city walls. Sure enough, a column of Frankish soldiers was forming up, preparing to retake the lost ground. Rollo's mind raced, assessing the situation. They had won a foothold, but at a heavy cost. Many of his best warriors lay dead or wounded. To press the attack now would be risky, but to lose the bridge would be catastrophic. In that moment, Rollo made a decision that would shape the course of the siege. Hold the bridge at all costs, he shouted. Form a shield wall and prepare for their charge. The Vikings scrambled to obey, forming a bristling line of shields and spears. Rollo took his place at the center, his presence bolstering the men's courage. The Frankish counterattack, when it came, was ferocious. Wave after wave of soldiers crashed against the Viking line, seeking to dislodge them from the hard-won bridge. For hours the battle hung in the balance, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. As night fell, the fighting finally subsided. The bridge remained in Viking hands, but the cost had been enormous. Rollo, exhausted and blood-spattered, made his way through the ranks of his men, offering words of encouragement and assessing their losses. In the days that followed, the siege settled into a grueling war of attrition. The Vikings, unable to breach the city's formidable walls, resorted to raiding the surrounding countryside. Rollo found himself increasingly at odds with Sigfrid and Sinrik, arguing for a more measured approach. One evening, as Rollo sat by his campfire pondering their next move, he was approached by a figure he didn't immediately recognize. The man was dressed in Frankish clothing, but there was something familiar about his bearing. Rollo, the man said in perfect Norse, I come with a message from Count Odo, the defender of Paris. Rollo's hand went to his axe, but he didn't draw it. And who might you be to speak for the Franks in our tongue? The man smiled wryly. I am called Sinrik, not to be confused with your leader of the same name. I am a translator, a man of many tongues. Count Odo wishes to parley. Intrigued despite himself, Rollo agreed to the meeting. The next day, under a flag of truce, he found himself face to face with Count Odo on the central island of Paris. Odo, a man of middling years with keen eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, spoke through Sinrik. You fight well, Norsemen, but surely you must see the futility of this siege. Our walls are strong, our supplies plentiful. How long can your men subsist on plunder alone? Rollo met Odo's gaze steadily. We have come for more than plunder, Count. We seek land, a place to settle. Your king has offered such to Vikings before. Why not to us? Odo's eyebrows raised slightly. You are more than a simple raider, it seems. But know this, King Charles will never cede Paris or the lands around it. Perhaps, though, we could come to some arrangement. As they continued to talk, Rollo felt a spark of possibility. Here, perhaps, was a path to the destiny Astrid had foreseen, not through conquest alone, but through negotiation and cunning. The parley ended without concrete agreements, but Rollo returned to the Viking camp with his mind awhirl. He found Sigfrid and Sinrik in heated discussion, their faces dark with anger. There you are, Sigfrid growled. While you've been playing diplomat, our men grow restless. We didn't come here to talk, we came to conquer. Rollo stood his ground. And how many more men must die before you realize that Paris will not fall to our axes alone? The Franks are willing to negotiate. We should listen. Sinrik spat on the ground. Listen? To promises of gold and land elsewhere? We are Vikings. We take what we want. The argument escalated, voices rising until they echoed across the camp. Other leaders gathered, drawn by the commotion. Rollo found himself at the center of a growing storm, his vision of a negotiated settlement clashing with the traditional Viking way of warfare. As night fell over the siege camp, Rollo stood alone by the riverbank, watching the lights of Paris flicker in the distance. The prophecy of a kingdom across the sea burned in his mind, but the path to that destiny seemed more uncertain than ever. He knew that the choices he made in the coming days would shape not only his own fate, but the fate of his people. The siege of Paris had become more than a simple raid. It was a crucible in which the future of the Vikings in Francia would be forged. As he turned back towards the camp, Rollo's resolve hardened. He would find a way to fulfill the prophecy, to carve out a place for his people in this new land. But it would be on his terms, blending the strength of the Viking way with the cunning needed to thrive in this complex world of Frankish politics. The siege of Paris was far from over, and Rollo's greatest challenges and opportunities still lay ahead. The siege of Paris had dragged on for months, and the harsh winter of 886 AD had taken its toll on both the Viking besiegers and the Frankish defenders. The once lush countryside surrounding the city had been stripped bare, and disease ran rampant through the Viking camp. Rollo, his face gaunt from the privations of the long campaign, stood atop a small hill overlooking the Seine, his eyes fixed on the stubborn walls of Paris. Rollo, a voice called out. He turned to see Halfdan approaching, his normally jovial face creased with worry. The men are restless. Sigfrid and Sinrik are calling for a final, all-out assault on the city. Rollo's jaw clenched. He had argued against such reckless action, knowing it would result in a bloodbath. And what do you think, old friend? Halfdan sighed, his breath misting in the cold air. I think we've bled enough for these Frankish stones, but the men, they need something, Rollo. Victory or an honorable retreat. This limbo is killing us as surely as Frankish swords. Rollo nodded, his mind racing. The time had come to make his move, to seize the destiny that had been prophesied so long ago. Gather the other Jarls, he said. It's time we settled this one way or another. As the Viking leaders assembled in the main tent, the tension was palpable. Sigfrid, his once impressive beard now matted and unkempt, glared at Rollo with undisguised hostility. Well, Rollo, have you finally come to your senses? Will you join us in crushing these Frankish dogs once and for all? Rollo met his gaze steadily. I have a proposal, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors. One that could end this siege and secure our future in these lands. Sinrik scoffed. More talk of negotiation? We are Vikings. We take what we want. And how has that worked for us so far? Rollo countered, his voice sharp. Look around you. Our men are dying, not from Frankish swords, but from hunger and disease. Even if we could take Paris, and that's far from certain, how long could we hold it? The entire Frankish kingdom would rise against us. He paused, letting his words sink in. But what if we could gain land, wealth, and power without losing another man? What if we could become part of this kingdom, not as conquered subjects, but as powerful lords? A murmur ran through the gathering. Rollo pressed his advantage. I have been in secret negotiations with Count Odo and representatives of King Charles. They are willing to grant us lands in the north, rich, fertile lands where we can settle and rule. Siegfried's face darkened with rage. Treachery. You would have us bow to these Christian weaklings? Rollo stood his ground. I would have us survive and thrive. Think, Siegfried. We could build something lasting here, something our children and their children could inherit. Isn't that worth more than a glorious death on Frankish walls? The tent erupted into chaos, with warriors shouting arguments for and against Rollo's proposal. Through it all, Rollo stood firm, his eyes never leaving Siegfried's face. Finally, as the clamor died down, Halfdan spoke up. Rollo speaks sense. We've followed the old ways, and where has it led us? To starvation and death on foreign soil. Perhaps it's time we tried a new path. Siegfried spat on the ground. Then go, traitors. Take your new path. But know this, you are no longer Vikings. You are thralls to a Frankish king. With that, he stormed out of the tent, followed by a handful of die-hard supporters. The remaining leaders looked to Rollo, uncertainty in their eyes. What now? One of them asked. Rollo straightened, feeling the weight of leadership settle fully on his shoulders. Now we negotiate our future. The next day, under a flag of truce, Rollo rode to the gates of Paris. Count Odo, accompanied by Bishop Jocelyn and the translator Sinric, met him in the no-man's land between the city walls and the Viking camp. So, Norseman, Odo said, his voice carrying a mix of wariness and respect. You claim to speak for your people now. What are your terms? Rollo dismounted, standing eye to eye with the Frankish count. We will lift the siege and swear fealty to King Charles. In return, we ask for lands in the north, Neustria, to be specific, where we can settle and rule as part of the Frankish kingdom. Bishop Jocelyn's eyes widened. And what of your pagan ways? Surely you must see that to be part of Christendom, you must embrace the one true faith. Rollo had anticipated this. We are willing to be baptized, he said, ignoring the murmurs of discontent from some of his men behind him. But understand this, such changes take time. We cannot simply abandon the ways of our fathers overnight. Odo stroked his beard thoughtfully. Your terms are not unreasonable. But can you guarantee that all your men will follow this new path? What of Siegfried and his followers? Rollo's face hardened. Those who do not wish to join us are free to leave. I speak for those who seek a future here, in this land. After hours of intense negotiation, an agreement was reached. Rollo and his followers would be granted the lands of Neustria, with Rollo himself to be baptized and married to Gisela, the king's own daughter. In return, they would defend the northern coasts against future Viking raids. As Rollo rode back to the Viking camp to share the news, he felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. He had taken the first step towards fulfilling the prophecy, but the hardest part was yet to come. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Siegfried and his loyalists departed, vowing vengeance against the traitors who had abandoned the old ways. Rollo found himself juggling the expectations of his own men with the demands of his new Frankish allies. The day of his baptism dawned clear and cold. Rollo stood in the shallows of the Seine, the icy water numbing his feet. Bishop Jocelyn intoned the Latin rites, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of Vikings and Franks. As the holy water was poured over his head, Rollo felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. He thought of Odin, of Thor, of all the gods of his fathers. "Forgive me," he whispered, too softly for anyone else to hear. The ceremony complete, Rollo emerged from the river to cheers from his men and cautious applause from the Franks. He caught sight of Gisela, his bride-to-be, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Later, as the celebrations wound down, Rollo found a moment alone with Halfdan. "Well, old friend," he said, "we've done it. We have our land, our place in this kingdom. Was it worth it?" Halfdan was silent for a long moment. "Only time will tell," he said at last. "But I'll say this, Rollo. You've given us a chance at a future. That's more than most of us ever dreamed of when we set out from our homes." Rollo nodded, his eyes distant. "A future, yes. But at what cost? We're no longer the men we were when we first came to these shores." "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing," Halfdan mused. "The world is changing, Rollo. Maybe it's time we changed with it." As night fell over the camp, Rollo stood alone by the riverbank, lost in thought. The prophecy of a crown and a kingdom echoed in his mind, but the path to that destiny now seemed more complex than ever. He thought of the challenges that lay ahead, governing his new lands, defending against both Frank and Viking, navigating the treacherous waters of Frankish politics. It would not be easy, but then, nothing worthwhile ever was. Rollo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his new responsibilities settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a Viking warrior, but a leader of a people in transition, a bridge between two worlds. As he turned back towards the camp, Rollo's resolve hardened. He would build something lasting here, something that would echo through the ages. The saga of Rollo, once the young wolf, now the first Duke of Normandy, was far from over. The future stretched out before him, full of promise and peril. But for the first time in years, Rollo felt truly alive, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Northman's gambit had paid off, and a new chapter in the history of both Vikings and Franks was about to begin. The year was 911 AD, and the land once known as Neustria had been transformed. Rollo, now in his 50s, stood atop the half-finished stone walls of Rouen, the capital of his fledgling duchy. His beard, once fiery red, was now streaked with gray, and the lines on his face told tales of both triumphs and hardships. 25 years had passed since the siege of Paris and Rollo's bold gambit. In that time he had worked tirelessly to build a new realm, one that blended Norse strength with Frankish customs. The result was Normandy, the land of the Northmen. As Rollo surveyed the bustling city below, a voice called out behind him, "Father, the envoys from King Charles have arrived." Rollo turned to see his son, William Longsword, striding towards him. At 20, William was the spitting image of Rollo in his youth, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same piercing blue eyes. But where Rollo had been all fire and impulse in his youth, William carried himself with a quiet intensity. "Very well," Rollo nodded. "Let's not keep them waiting. It's time to secure our future, my son." As they made their way to the Great Hall, Rollo couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The early years had been fraught with challenges: rebellious Viking jarls who chafed under Frankish law, suspicious Frankish nobles who saw the Normans as little more than barbarians in fine clothes, and the constant threat of raids from their former Norse brethren. But through it all, Rollo had persevered. He had learned the art of Frankish politics, mastered the intricacies of feudal law, and even embraced the Christian faith, outwardly at least. In private moments, he still found himself whispering prayers to Odin and Thor, the gods of his fathers. The Great Hall was packed with Norman nobles and Frankish envoys when Rollo and William entered. At the center stood Archbishop Franco of Rouen, the man who had been both Rollo's tutor in Christian ways and his link to the Frankish court. "My Lord Rollo," Franco began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "I bring word from King Charles. He is prepared to formally recognize you as Duke of Normandy and your son William as your heir." A murmur of excitement rippled through the gathered Normans. Rollo raised a hand for silence. "And what does the king ask in return for this generosity?" Franco's expression remained neutral. "He asks for your renewed oath of fealty, and for Norman support in his struggles against the rebellious nobles of Neustria and Burgundy. Rollo's eyes narrowed. He knew the fragile state of the Frankish kingdom, with Charles the Simple struggling to maintain control against increasingly powerful local lords. It was a dangerous game, but one that could offer great rewards. "And if we provide this support," Rollo pressed, "what guarantees do we have of our autonomy? I did not build this realm to be a mere puppet of the Frankish crown." One of the Frankish envoys, a haughty-looking man with a thin mustache, stepped forward. "You forget yourself, Norseman. You rule these lands at the pleasure of King Charles. Perhaps you need reminding of your place." The hall erupted in angry shouts from the Norman nobles. William's hand went to his sword, but Rollo placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Peace," Rollo commanded, his voice cutting through the clamor. He fixed the Frankish envoy with a steely gaze. "I have not forgotten the oaths I swore, but neither have I forgotten the blood and sweat it took to tame these lands. Normandy is as much our creation as it is a gift from your king." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We will renew our oaths and provide support to King Charles. In return, we ask for formal recognition of our rights and customs, and the expansion of our territories to include the Cotentin Peninsula." Archbishop Franco nodded slowly. "These terms are not unreasonable. I believe we can reach an agreement that satisfies both sides." As the negotiations continued late into the night, Rollo found himself reflecting on the strange turns his life had taken. From a young Viking raider to the founder of a dynasty, he had traveled a path few could have imagined. Later, as the hall emptied and the last of the candles guttered, Rollo stood alone by the great hearth. The weight of his achievements, and the challenges still to come, pressed heavily upon him. "Father?" William's voice broke through his reverie. "Are you well?" Rollo turned to his son, seeing in him the future of all they had built. "I was just thinking, my boy, about the past and the future that lies ahead of us." William stepped closer, his voice low. "The Franks still see us as outsiders, don't they? Despite everything we've done, everything we've built." Rollo nodded gravely. "They do, and they always will, to some extent. That is why we must be stronger, smarter, and more cunning than they are. We must build something here that will outlast us both." He placed a hand on William's shoulder. "You, my son, will face challenges I never did. You were born here, raised in both Norse and Frankish ways. It will fall to you to truly unite these people, to forge a Norman identity that is neither purely Norse nor Frankish, but something new." William straightened, his jaw set with determination. "I won't fail you, father. Or our people." Rollo smiled, a rare softening of his usually stern features. "I know you won't. But remember, the greatest strength of our people has always been our ability to adapt. We were raiders and we became settlers. We were pagans and we embraced the Christian God, even if some of us still keep the old ways in our hearts." He turned back to the dying fire. "The world is changing, William. The old Viking ways are fading. To survive, to thrive, we must change with it. But we must never forget who we are, where we came from." As dawn broke over Rouen the next day, Rollo stood in the castle courtyard, watching as his son prepared to depart for Paris. William would represent Normandy at the Frankish court, cementing their new agreement and beginning to build the alliances that would secure their future. "Remember," Rollo said as William mounted his horse, "you are a son of Vikings and a prince of the Franks. Use both sides of your heritage. Be diplomatic when you can, but never forget the strength that flows in your veins." William nodded, his expression solemn. "I will make you proud, father." As the young prince and his retinue rode out of the castle gates, Rollo felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. He had laid the foundations, but it would be up to William and the generations that followed to build upon them. Later that day, as Rollo walked the streets of Rouen with his trusted advisor, Bernard the Dane, he was struck by how much the city had changed. Norse longhouses stood alongside Frankish manors, and in the marketplace, Viking traders haggled with Frankish merchants in a pidgin of Old Norse and Frankish. "We've built something remarkable here, haven't we?" Rollo mused. Bernard nodded. "Indeed, my lord. But there are still challenges ahead. The Bretons to the west grow restless, and there are whispers of fresh Viking raids along the coast." Rollo's eyes hardened. "Let them come. We'll show them that the wolves of the north have not gone soft in their new home." As they reached the newly constructed cathedral, Rollo paused. The Christian God still felt foreign to him in many ways, but he had come to appreciate the power of the church as a unifying force for his people. "Arrange for a mass of thanksgiving," he told Bernard. "Let the people see that their duke stands with them in faith as well as in war." As night fell over Normandy, Rollo stood once again atop the walls of Rouen. He thought of the young raider he had once been, of the prophecy that had driven him across the seas. Had this been the destiny foretold so long ago? A duchy instead of a kingdom, but a legacy that promised to endure. In the distance, he could see the fires of farmsteads and villages stretching to the horizon. This was his land now, his people. Norse and Frank, pagan and Christian, all united under the banner of Normandy. Rollo took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities, but he had faced uncertainty before and emerged victorious. Whatever came next, he would face it as he always had, with courage, cunning, and the indomitable spirit of the Northmen. As he turned to descend from the walls, Rollo allowed himself a small smile. The saga of the Sea King was far from over. Indeed, in many ways, it was just beginning. The year was 927 AD, and the autumn winds swept across Normandy, carrying with them the scent of change. Rollo, now in his 70s, stood at the window of his chamber in Rouen, his once powerful frame slightly stooped with age. His eyes, however, remained as sharp as ever, scanning the courtyard below where his son, William Longsword, was overseeing the training of Norman knights. A knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. "Enter," Rollo called, his voice still carrying the authority of a ruler. Bernard the Dane, now as gray as his lord but still serving as Rollo's most trusted advisor, stepped into the room. "My lord," he said, his voice grave, "I bring troubling news from the north." Rollo turned, his brow furrowing. "Speak, old friend." Bernard handed him a parchment. "A message from our spies in Denmark. It seems your nephew, Gorm the Old, has united the Danish kingdoms. He's amassing a fleet, and there are whispers of a great invasion force." Rollo's eyes narrowed as he read the message. The threat of Viking raids had never truly disappeared, but this was something on a scale they hadn't seen in decades. "Have you told William?" Rollo asked. Bernard shook his head. "Not yet, my lord. I thought it best to consult with you first." Rollo nodded, his mind racing. "Good. We must handle this carefully. The Franks are watching us closely, always suspicious of our Norse connections. If word of this reaches them before we're prepared..." He trailed off, but Bernard understood. The delicate balance they had maintained for years, Norman strength coupled with Frankish legitimacy, could be undone in an instant. "What would you have us do, my lord?" Bernard asked. Rollo was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "Summon the council. It's time we reminded our people of who we are and who we are not." Hours later, the great hall of Rouen was filled with Norman nobles, many of whom still bore the unmistakable features of their Viking ancestors. Rollo sat at the head of the table with William at his right hand and Bernard at his left. "My lords," Rollo began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "for decades, we have built a new life here in Normandy. We have embraced Frankish ways, sworn fealty to Frankish kings, but we have never forgotten our roots." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. "Now, those roots threaten to strangle us. A great Danish fleet gathers in the north, led by my own nephew Gorm. They look to our shores with hungry eyes, seeing us as easy prey, Norsemen gone soft in Frankish lands. A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Rollo raised a hand for silence. We must show them, and the Franks, that we are neither soft, nor have we forgotten how to fight. But we must do so carefully, lest we be seen as conspirators with our pagan kin. William leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. Father, surely we must strike first. Catch them before they reach our shores. Rollo shook his head. No, my son. That would only confirm the Franks' worst suspicions about us. We must be more cunning. He turned to the assembled nobles. We will strengthen our defenses, train our men, and prepare for the storm to come. But we will do so under the guise of loyalty to the Frankish crown. We will send word to King Raoul, offering our services to protect all of France's northern coast. Bernard nodded approvingly. A wise move, my lord. It shows our commitment to our oaths while allowing us to arm ourselves without suspicion. But not all were convinced. Odo, a young firebrand of a noble with more Norse blood than Frankish, stood up. And what of our kinsmen? He demanded. Are we to raise our swords against our own blood? Have we truly become nothing more than Frankish lapdogs? The hall erupted in shouts, some supporting Odo's words, others denouncing them. Rollo let the clamor continue for a moment before slamming his fist on the table, the sound like a thunderclap in the suddenly silent room. Enough! He roared, rising to his feet. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away, and the assembly saw once again the fierce Viking warrior who had forged a duchy from nothing. We are Normans, neither fully Norse nor fully Frank, but something new, something stronger. He fixed Odo with a steely gaze. Our kinsmen come not as family, but as conquerors. They would take what we have built, destroy all we have accomplished. I ask you, as a man who would burn your home and enslave your children, truly your kinsman, simply because he shares your blood? Odo sat down, chastened, as murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Rollo continued, his voice softening slightly. I understand your conflicted hearts. I too once stood on the other side, looking at these lands with a raider's eyes. But we have built something here worth fighting for, worth dying for. We will face this threat not as Vikings, not as Franks, but as Normans. The assembly ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As the nobles filed out, Rollo caught William's arm. Walk with me, son, he said. They made their way to the castle battlements, looking out over the city of Rouen as the sun began to set. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, William broke the silence. Father, I fear I may have spoken hastily earlier. Your way is wiser. Rollo nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. You have a warrior's heart, William. It serves you well in battle, but rulership requires more. You must learn to fight with words and alliances as much as with sword and axe. He turned to face his son fully. The coming months will test us all. You must be prepared to take my place, to lead our people through this storm. William's eyes widened. Father, surely you don't mean... Rollo held up a hand. I am an old man, William. I have led our people for many years, but my time is drawing to a close. This may be my last great service to Normandy, to prepare us for this threat, and to ensure a smooth transition of power. Tears glistened in William's eyes, but he blinked them away, straightening his shoulders. I won't fail you, Father, or our people. Rollo clasped his son's shoulder. I know you won't. You are my son, but more than that, you are a true Norman. In you, the strength of our Norse ancestors blends with the wisdom of our Frankish allies. You will lead our people into a new era. As darkness fell over Rouen, Rollo and William stood side by side, watching as the city below came alive with torchlight. The challenges ahead were daunting, but in that moment both father and son felt a sense of hope and determination. In the weeks that followed, Normandy was a hive of activity. Coastal defenses were strengthened, knights and foot soldiers drilled relentlessly, and messengers rode back and forth between Rouen and the Frankish court. Rollo worked tirelessly, drawing on all his years of experience to prepare his people for the coming storm. But even as he worked, Rollo felt the weight of his years pressing down upon him. Each night, he would retire to his private chapel, where he would light candles not only to the Christian God, but also to Odin and Thor, seeking guidance and strength from all the divine powers he had known. One such night, as Rollo knelt before the altar, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Still hedging your bets, old friend?" He turned to see Astrid, the vulva who had set him on this path so many years ago. She was ancient now, her once wild hair white as snow, but her eyes still held that otherworldly gleam. "Astrid," Rollo breathed, hardly believing his eyes. "How?" She cackled, the sound echoing off the chapel walls. "Did you think I would miss the culmination of the destiny I foretold? The threads of fate are drawing tight, Rollo. The choices you make in the coming days will shape the future of your people for generations to come." Rollo stood, facing the old seer. "Tell me then, have I fulfilled the prophecy? Is this the kingdom you foresaw?" Astrid's expression grew serious. "You have built something great, Rollo, but prophecies are tricky things. The crown I saw may not be the one you imagined. The kingdom may be one of legacy rather than land." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The true test is yet to come, not just for you, but for your son and his son after him. The Norman saga is only beginning, Rollo, and you must decide how it will be remembered." With that, she turned and shuffled out of the chapel, leaving Rollo alone with his thoughts. As he stood there, surrounded by the flickering light of candles, Rollo felt the weight of his life's choices pressing down upon him. He had come so far from the young Viking raider who had first set foot on these shores. He had built a realm, founded a dynasty, and forged a new people. But had it been worth the cost? The compromises, the betrayals, the loss of the old ways? As dawn broke over Normandy, Rollo emerged from the chapel, his face set with grim determination. Whatever doubts plagued him in the dark of night, he knew that he had no choice but to move forward. His people were counting on him, and he would not fail them now. The coming battle would not just be for land or power, but for the very soul of Normandy. And Rollo, the Sea King, the founder of a dynasty, was determined to see his life's work secured, no matter the cost. The year was 928 AD, and the air over Normandy crackled with tension. For months, the Normans had prepared, strengthening defenses and training relentlessly. Now, as spring gave way to summer, the dreaded news finally arrived. The Danish fleet had been sighted off the coast. Rollo, his body feeling every one of his 70-plus years, stood atop the walls of Rouen, surveying the bustling city below. The streets were filled with a mixture of determination and fear, as citizens prepared for the coming storm. "Father," William's voice cut through Rollo's contemplation. He turned to see his son striding towards him, armor glinting in the morning sun. "The scouts have returned. The Danish fleet is larger than we feared, at least 200 ships." Rollo's jaw tightened. "And what word from our Frankish allies?" William's expression darkened. "King Raoul sends his best wishes for our defense of the realm, but claims he cannot spare any troops. We stand alone." A bitter laugh escaped Rollo's lips. "Of course. They're content to let us bleed, defending their borders. So be it. We'll show them the strength of Normandy." As they descended from the walls, Bernard the Dane approached, his face grave. "My lords, a messenger has arrived from the Danish fleet. He bears a message from Gorm himself." In the great hall, the Norman leaders gathered around as the Danish messenger, a young man with fierce blue eyes, delivered his king's words. "Gorm the Old, King of Denmark, sends greetings to his uncle, Rollo of Normandy," the messenger began, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "He bids you remember the blood that flows in your veins and the gods of our fathers. Bend the knee, renounce your Christian ways, and Gorm will welcome you and your people back into the fold of true Norsemen. Resist, and he will sweep you aside like the Frankish dogs you've become." A roar of outrage swept through the hall. William's hand went to his sword, but Rollo raised a hand for silence. "Tell your king," Rollo replied, his voice cold as ice, "that Rollo of Normandy bends his knee to no man, be he Frank or Dane. We are Normans, not Norse, not Frank, but something new and stronger than both. If Gorm wants these lands, he'll have to take them over my dead body, and those of every Norman who stands with me." The messenger's eyes widened at the ferocity in Rollo's voice. Without another word, he turned and left the hall. As the Norman leaders dispersed to make final preparations, Rollo pulled William aside. "The time has come, my son. You will lead our forces in the field. I am too old for battle now." William started to protest, but Rollo silenced him with a look. "No, William, this is your moment. Show our people and our enemies the strength of the next generation of Norman rulers." The next day dawned bright and clear, a cruel irony given the bloodshed to come. From the walls of Rouen, Rollo watched as William led the Norman army out to meet the Danish invaders. The clash of Norse and Norman blood would decide the fate of all they had built. Hours passed like years as Rollo waited for news. Finally, as the sun began to set, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping at full speed towards the city. Rollo's heart clenched, fearing the worst. But as the rider drew closer, Rollo could see he bore the Norman standard. Hope surged through him as the gates opened and the messenger rode in. "Victory!" the rider shouted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and exhilaration. "Duke William has routed the Danish forces. Gorm's fleet burns, and the invaders flee back to the sea." A cheer went up from the walls, spreading through the city like wildfire. Rollo closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks to both the Christian God and the Norse gods of his youth. As night fell, the victorious Norman army returned, led by William. The young duke, bloodied but unbowed, dismounted before his father. "We've done it, father," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "Normandy stands strong." Rollo embraced his son, feeling a surge of pride. "You've done well, my boy. Come, let's tend to your wounds and hear the full tale of your victory." In the privacy of Rollo's chambers, as a healer tended to William's injuries, father and son spoke in low voices. "It was a near thing," William admitted. "Gorm's forces were fierce, and for a moment I thought all was lost. But then I remembered your words, father, about being neither Norse nor Frank, but Norman. I rallied our men, reminding them of who we are and what we fight for. It turned the tide." Rollo nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "You've learned well, William. A true leader inspires his men, gives them something to believe in beyond mere conquest or plunder." William winced as the healer applied a poultice to a particularly nasty gash. "There's more, father. In the heat of battle, I found myself face to face with Gorm himself. We fought, and I struck him down." Rollo's eyes widened. "Gorm is dead?" William shook his head. "Wounded, but he escaped with his remaining forces. I doubt we've seen the last of him." Rollo sighed, feeling the weight of his years. "No, I suspect we haven't. But you've bought us time, and more importantly, you've shown both our enemies and our Frankish allies the strength of Normandy." The next day, as the people of Rouen celebrated their victory, Rollo called for a great assembly. Norman nobles, Frankish observers, and common folk alike gathered in the square before the cathedral. Rollo stood before them, William at his side. For a moment, he was transported back to that day so long ago, when he had first claimed these lands. How much had changed since then, and yet, how much remained the same. "People of Normandy," Rollo began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Yesterday, we faced a test unlike any we have seen in a generation. Our Norse kinsmen came not as family, but as conquerors, seeking to undo all we have built. They thought us weak, softened by Frankish ways. They were wrong." A cheer went up from the crowd. Rollo raised his hand for silence. "We stand here today not as Vikings, not as Franks, but as Normans. We have taken the strength of our Norse ancestors and combined it with the civilization of our Frankish neighbors. We are something new, something powerful. He turned to William, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Yesterday, my son, your Duke, led our forces to victory. He has proven himself a true leader of Normandy. And so, it is time for me to step aside. A gasp rippled through the assembly. William himself looked shocked. From this day forward, Rollo continued, William Longsword shall rule as Duke of Normandy in his own right. I will remain as his advisor, but the time has come for a new generation to lead us into the future. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Rollo leaned close to William. The hardest part begins now, my son. Ruling in peace is often more challenging than leading in war, but I have faith in you. William nodded, his face a mixture of pride and apprehension. I won't let you down, Father. I won't let Normandy down. As the celebration continued into the night, Rollo found a quiet moment alone. He thought of the long journey that had brought him here, from Viking raider to founder of a dynasty. The prophecy of a crown and kingdom had come true, though perhaps not in the way he had once imagined. Normandy was his legacy, a new kind of realm that blended the best of Norse and Frankish worlds. And in William, he saw the future. A leader who could navigate the complex political landscape of Francia, while never forgetting the warrior spirit that had forged their people. As he looked out over the city he had built, Rollo felt a sense of completion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he had laid the foundation for something that would endure. The saga of the Normans was far from over, but his chapter was drawing to a close. With a silent prayer to both the Christian God and the Norse gods of his youth, Rollo turned back to join the celebration. The future of Normandy was bright, and he had played his part in shaping it. Now it was time for the next generation to write their own epic tale. The year was 931 AD, and the autumn winds swept through the streets of Rouen, carrying with them the scent of change. Rollo, now in his late 70s, sat in his private chambers, his once imposing frame diminished by age but his eyes still sharp as ever. Before him stood his son, William Longsword, Duke of Normandy for 3 years now, and beside him, a young boy of about 6, Richard, William's son and heir. Grandfather, young Richard piped up, his eyes wide with curiosity. Tell me again about the great ships that brought our people here. Rollo chuckled, a sound that quickly turned into a cough. As William moved to assist him, Rollo waved him off. I'm fine, boy. Just the years catching up with me. He turned his attention to Richard. Ah, the longships. They were like great dragons, Richard. Their prows carved with fierce beasts, oars cutting through the waves like the wings of eagles. As Rollo regaled his grandson with tales of the old days, William watched with a mixture of fondness and concern. His father's health had been declining rapidly in recent months, and there was a tension in the air, a sense that an era was coming to an end. Later, after Richard had been sent off to his lessons, William sat across from his father, his face grave. The Franks are growing restless again, he said. There are whispers that King Raoul seeks to test our loyalties. Rollo's eyes narrowed. After all we've done to secure their borders? Ungrateful dogs. William nodded. It's more than that. Our success has bred jealousy and fear. They see our strength and worry we might turn our ambitions inward. And what of our own people? Rollo asked. Do they still chafe at Frankish customs? William sighed, running a hand through his beard. Some do. The old ways die hard, especially among the common folk. We walk a fine line, Father, between two worlds. Rollo was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. Listen well, my son. The challenge you face is not new. It is the same one I grappled with when I first claimed these lands. We are neither fully Norse nor fully Frank. We are Norman. Our strength lies in our ability to adapt, to take the best of both worlds and forge something new. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into William's. But never forget where we came from. The sea is in our blood. The spirit of the North beats in our hearts. We bow to the Frankish king, yes, but we are not his slaves. We are allies, partners in the defense of this realm. William nodded slowly. And what of the old gods? Many still whisper prayers to Odin and Thor, even as they attend Christian Mass. A faint smile touched Rollo's lips. The gods. Ah, the gods. I have prayed to many in my time, William. The Christian God has served us well in many ways, giving us legitimacy in the eyes of our Frankish neighbors. But the old gods, they are the wind in our sails, the fire in our hearts. Let the people keep their private devotions. A man's faith is between him and the divine. As night fell, Rollo found himself alone in his chambers. He could feel the weight of years pressing down upon him, knew that his time was growing short. With effort, he rose and made his way to a heavy chest in the corner of the room. Opening it, he pulled out a small, worn figurine of Odin, carved from whalebone, a relic from his raiding days. Old friend, he murmured, running his thumb over the smooth surface. I fear our time together is coming to an end. Have I done enough? Will our people endure? A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Enter, he called, hastily returning the figurine to its hiding place. To his surprise, it was not William or a servant who entered, but Astrid, the vulva who had first set him on this path so many years ago. She was ancient now, her once wild hair white as snow, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. Astrid, Rollo breathed, scarcely believing his eyes. How? The old seer cackled, the sound eerily familiar despite the passage of decades. Did you think I would miss the final chapter of your saga, Rollo Ganger? The threads of fate are drawing tight. The end of one tale and the beginning of another. Rollo gestured for her to sit, pouring them both cups of mead. Have I fulfilled the prophecy, Astrid? The crown, the kingdom across the sea? Astrid's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. Prophecies are tricky things, old wolf. You have indeed worn a crown, though perhaps not the one you once imagined. And this land, she gestured widely, encompassing all of Normandy, is indeed a kingdom in all but name. But your true legacy, that is still unfolding. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Listen well, Rollo. The seeds you have planted here will grow into a mighty tree. Your descendants will shape the fate of nations. But the path ahead is fraught with danger. The Norman saga is only beginning, and it will be written in blood and glory across the face of Europe. Rollo felt a chill run down his spine. And William? Richard? What of their fates? Astrid's expression grew somber. Your son will face great trials, Rollo. His loyalty will be tested, his strength challenged. And young Richard? Ah, the wolf cub will grow to be a lion. But the price of greatness is high, and the gods are not always kind. As dawn broke over Rouen, Rollo stood on the balcony of his chambers, watching the city come to life. He could see the blend of Norse and Frankish influences in every building, every face that passed below. This was his legacy, a new people, forged in the crucible of two cultures. William joined him, concern etched on his face. Father, you should be resting. The physicians say... Rollo waved him off. Bah, what do they know? I'll rest soon enough, my son. But now I want to see the world we've built. As they walked through the streets of Rouen, Rollo leaning heavily on William's arm, the people bowed and murmured greetings. There was genuine affection in their eyes mixed with deep respect. They paused at the great cathedral, its spires reaching towards the heavens. I never thought I'd build such things, Rollo mused. When I first came to these shores, I was more interested in burning churches than raising them. William chuckled. Times change, Father. We change with them. Rollo nodded slowly. Indeed we do. But remember, William, change is not about forgetting who you are. It's about growing, adapting. We are Normans, Norse strength tempered by Frankish civilization. Never let anyone make you forget that. As they turned back towards the castle, Rollo felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. William caught him as he stumbled. Father. Rollo waved off his concern, but allowed William to support him. It's all right, my boy. Just just the years catching up with me. That night, as Rollo lay in his bed, he could feel the life ebbing from his body. William sat beside him, holding his hand, while young Richard stood at the foot of the bed, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "William," Rollo said, his voice barely above a whisper, Promise me you'll keep our people strong, independent. We bow to the Frankish king, yes, but we are not his servants. We are Normans." William nodded, tears in his eyes. "I swear it, father, by the Christian God and the old gods both." Rollo turned his gaze to Richard. "And you, little wolf, you will be Duke one day. Remember the tales I told you. Remember where we came from, and let it guide you to where you must go." As the last breath left Rollo's body, a strange wind seemed to sweep through the chamber, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and sea. For a moment, just a moment, William thought he heard the creaking of oars and the flapping of sailcloth. In the days that followed, all of Normandy mourned. Rollo, the Sea King, the founder of their dynasty, was laid to rest with honors befitting both a Christian duke and a Norse warrior. In the great cathedral of Rouen, prayers were offered to the Christian God for his soul. But in secret corners and quiet hearths throughout the land, many also whispered prayers to Odin, asking the All-Father to welcome the great warrior into Valhalla. As William stood before his father's tomb, young Richard at his side, he felt the weight of legacy settling upon his shoulders. The challenges ahead were many, balancing Norman independence with Frankish allegiance, preserving their unique culture in a changing world. But as he looked down at his son, saw the mixture of Norse strength and Frankish refinement in the boy's features, William felt a surge of hope. Rollo's dream lived on in them, in all the Norman people. They were the bridge between two worlds, the forgers of a new destiny. The saga of the Sea King had ended, but the epic tale of the Normans was just beginning, and it would be a story that would echo through the ages, shaping the fate of kingdoms and empires for centuries to come. The year was 1066, and the winds of change were blowing fiercely across the English Channel. In the great hall of Rouen, Duke William of Normandy, great-great-grandson of Rollo the Sea King, paced restlessly. His powerful frame, honed by years of warfare, was taut with tension. Around him, his most trusted advisors watched in uneasy silence. "It's confirmed, then?" William's voice was low, but it carried an undercurrent of barely contained fury. "Edward is dead, and Harold Godwinson has taken the throne of England?" Odo, Bishop of Bayeux and William's half-brother, nodded grimly. "Yes, my lord. Our spies report that Harold was crowned in Westminster Abbey with the support of the Witenagemot." William's fist came down hard on the oak table, causing goblets to rattle. "Treachery! Edward promised me the throne. I am the rightful heir to England." Silence fell over the hall. The Norman nobles exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in their eyes. They all knew what this meant. War was coming. William took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, filled with the authority that had made him one of the most feared and respected rulers in Europe. "Gentlemen, the time has come for Normandy to claim its destiny. For too long we have been content with our duchy, but our ancestor, Rollo the Sea King, dreamed of greater things. He saw a crown in his future, and now we shall seize it." He turned to his half-brother Robert of Mortain. "Send word to our vassals. I want every able-bodied man mustered. We'll need ships, hundreds of them, and horses. We're not going to England as raiders but as conquerors." As the hall erupted into a flurry of activity, William retreated to his private chambers. There, away from the eyes of his nobles, he allowed himself a moment of doubt. He approached a small, ornate chest, a family heirloom passed down from Rollo himself. Opening it, he withdrew a small, worn figurine of Odin carved from whalebone. "Old gods of my ancestors," he murmured, running his thumb over the smooth surface. Guide me in the days to come. Give me the strength of Rollo, the cunning of William Longsword, the resilience of Richard the Fearless. The fate of our dynasty hangs in the balance. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Enter, he called, hastily returning the figurine to its hiding place. Matilda, his wife and trusted confidant, stepped into the room. Her eyes, sharp as ever, took in his troubled expression. "You're worried," she stated simply. William nodded, allowing his guard to drop in her presence. "This will be the greatest gamble of our lives, Matilda. If we fail..." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch reassuring. "We will not fail. You are William the Bastard, Duke of Normandy. You've overcome every obstacle life has thrown at you. England is simply the next challenge to conquer." He smiled, drawing strength from her confidence. "You're right, of course, but it's not just about the conquest. It's about what comes after. We're not just taking a kingdom. We're fulfilling a destiny set in motion generations ago." Matilda's eyes gleamed with understanding. Rollo's prophecy, the crown across the sea. William nodded. "For years our family has straddled two worlds, Norse and Frank. Now we have the chance to forge something even greater. A Norman kingdom that will shape the future of Europe." As summer turned to autumn, the coast of Normandy became a hive of activity. Ships were built, provisions gathered, and men trained for the invasion to come. William oversaw it all, driving his people with a relentless energy that bordered on obsession. On the eve of their departure, William gathered his army on the beach of Dives-sur-Mer. Thousands of men stood ready, their armor glinting in the fading light, banners fluttering in the sea breeze. William rode before them, his voice carrying across the assembled host. "Men of Normandy, tomorrow we set sail for England. We go not just to claim a crown, but to fulfill a destiny centuries in the making. Our ancestor, Rollo the Sea King, saw a vision of a Norman ruler on the throne of a great kingdom. That vision becomes reality with us." A cheer went up from the army, the sound like thunder rolling across the beach. "We are the children of Vikings and Franks," William continued, his voice swelling with pride. "In our veins flows the blood of conquerors and kings. The English think us mere continental lords, but we will show them the true strength of Normandy." As night fell, William found himself unable to sleep. He stood at the prow of his flagship, the Mora, staring out across the dark waters of the Channel. In his mind's eye, he could see the ghostly shapes of Viking longships, hear the phantom creaking of oars and the flapping of sailcloth. "I feel them, you know," a voice said behind him. William turned to see an old woman, her white hair wild in the sea breeze, leaning on a gnarled staff. "Who are you?" William demanded, hand going to his sword. "How did you get aboard?" The old woman cackled, the sound eerily familiar, though William couldn't place it. "I've been here all along, young wolf. I was there when Rollo first set foot on these shores. I was there when your father and grandfather ruled. And now, I'm here to see the culmination of a destiny set in motion long ago." Realization dawned on William. You're the Vulva, the seer from the old tales." She nodded, her eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Astrid, they called me. And you, William the Bastard, are about to change the course of history." William's voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me, wise one, will we succeed? Will I wear the crown of England?" Astrid's expression grew serious. "The threads of fate are complex, young wolf. I see victory, yes, but at a great cost. The crown will sit heavy on your brow, and the land you conquer will shape you as much as you shape it." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Remember, William, you go to England not just as a conqueror, but as the heir to two great legacies. You carry the strength of the Norse and the civilization of the Franks. The kingdom you build must be a bridge between worlds, just as Normandy has been." Before William could respond, a gust of wind swept across the deck. When it passed, Astrid was gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Dawn broke clear and bright on September 28th, 1066. As the Norman fleet set sail for England, William stood at the helm of the Mora, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him, nearly 1,000 ships carried his army, the largest invasion force Europe had seen in centuries. As the white cliffs of England came into view, William felt a surge of emotion, excitement, fear, and a profound sense of destiny. This was the moment Rollo had foreseen, the fulfillment of a prophecy that had driven his family for generations. The landing at Pevensey was unopposed, Harold's forces drawn north to face another threat. As William set foot on English soil, he stumbled slightly. Quickly regaining his balance, he grasped a handful of sand. "By the splendor of God," he proclaimed, loud enough for his men to hear, "I have taken possession of England with both my hands." A cheer went up from the army as they began to disembark. William turned to his closest advisors, his face set with determination. "We make for Hastings. Harold will come to us, and there we will decide the fate of England." In the days that followed, as the Norman army prepared for the coming battle, William found quiet moments to reflect on the enormity of what they were undertaking. He thought of Rollo, of the legacy that had been passed down through generations of Norman dukes. On the morning of October 14th, as the Norman army formed up on Senlac Hill, William addressed his men one final time. "Today, we fight not just for a crown, but for our place in history. We are Normans, heirs to the Vikings who terrorized these shores and the Franks who civilized them. Show the English the strength of our arms and the fire in our hearts." As the battle began, William led from the front, his distinctive helmet and banner making him a rallying point for his troops. The fighting was fierce, with the fate of two nations hanging in the balance. In the heat of battle, as arrows rained down and the clash of steel filled the air, William felt an almost supernatural energy coursing through him. It was as if the spirits of his ancestors, Rollo, William Longsword, Richard the Fearless, were fighting alongside him. As the sun began to set, the tide of battle turned. Harold Godwinson fell, struck down by an arrow to the eye, and the English lines began to crumble. Victory was within grasp. In that moment, as William raised his sword in triumph, he saw a vision of Rollo standing before him, nodding in approval. The prophecy was fulfilled. The crown across the sea was won. But even as the exhilaration of victory washed over him, William knew that the real challenge was just beginning. He had won a kingdom, but now he had to rule it. He would need to balance the expectations of his Norman followers with the realities of governing a conquered people. As night fell over the battlefield of Hastings, William the Conqueror, no longer just Duke of Normandy but now King of England, looked to the stars. The saga that had begun with Rollo the Sea King had reached a climax, but it was far from over. The salty breeze whipped through Nadad's long braided hair as he stood atop the rocky cliffs overlooking the Norwegian fjord. The year was 860 AD, and the world was ripe for exploration. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, its light glinting off the calm waters below. Nadad's calloused hands gripped the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that spoke of an unquenchable thirst for adventure. "Odin Allfather," he whispered, his voice carried away by the wind, "guide my path. Show me where my destiny lies." As if in answer to his prayer, a raven swooped down from the darkening sky, landing on a nearby rock. Its obsidian eyes locked with Nadad's, and for a moment he felt as if he could see the wisdom of ages within their depths. The bird cawed once, then spread its wings and took flight, heading west over the sea. Nadad's heart raced. He had heard tales of lands to the west, whispered around campfires and in mead halls, islands of fire and ice, rich in resources and ripe for the taking. But no one had dared to venture so far into the unknown. Until now. With renewed purpose, Nadad made his way down the winding path to the village below. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat filled the air as he approached the longhouse of Hakon the Bold, Jarl of their settlement. Inside, the warmth of the central hearth and the buzz of conversation enveloped him. "Nadad," Come, share a drink with us, called out Håkon, raising a horn of mead in greeting. The Jarl was a bear of a man, his beard streaked with gray, and his arms marked with the scars of countless battles. Nadad nodded in respect but remained standing. Jarl Håkon, I come with a request. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the young warrior. Håkon's brow furrowed, sensing the weight of the moment. Speak then. Taking a deep breath, Nadad announced, I wish to lead an expedition west, beyond the known lands. The gods have shown me a sign, and I believe great riches and glory await us there. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Håkon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what sign is this, Nadad? Have you been listening to the ramblings of that old seer again? Before Nadad could respond, a voice cut through the tension. I have seen it too, Jarl Håkon. Bjorn, the village seer, stepped forward from the shadows. His long white beard and staff marked him as a man of wisdom and mystical knowledge. The gods speak of a great destiny for our people, but it lies not here in Norway, but across the western seas. Håkon scoffed, taking another swig of mead. Destiny? We have all we need right here. Our raids on the southern lands bring us wealth, and our farms provide food. Why risk everything on some fool's errand? Nadad's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. With respect, Jarl, our people have always been explorers. It's in our blood. The lands to the south grow more defended with each passing year. If we do not seek new horizons, we risk stagnation and eventual defeat. A murmur of agreement rose from some of the younger warriors in the room. Håkon's face darkened as he realized he was losing the support of his people. And who would you take on this suicide mission, Nadad? Our best warriors? Our skilled craftsmen? Leave us defenseless against our enemies? Before Nadad could answer, another voice joined the fray. I will go. All heads turned to see Astrid, the fiercest shield maiden in the village, step forward. Her golden hair was braided tightly against her head, and her hand rested casually on the axe at her hip. Nadad speaks the truth. We cannot grow if we do not dare to reach beyond what we know. Håkon slammed his fist on the table, causing mead to slosh from nearby cups. Enough. I will not sanction this foolishness. Nadad, Astrid, you are both valuable members of this community. I forbid you from undertaking this journey. The longhouse erupted into heated debate, with supporters and detractors arguing loudly. Nadad locked eyes with Astrid, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew that Håkon's word would not be the end of this. As the argument raged on, Nadad slipped out of the longhouse into the cool night air. He made his way to the docks, where the longships bobbed gently in the calm waters of the fjord. Running his hand along the smooth wood of the nearest vessel, he whispered, Soon, my friend. Soon we'll taste the open sea together. I thought I'd find you here, came Astrid's voice from behind him. She approached, her footsteps nearly silent on the wooden dock. Håkon is a fool if he thinks he can keep us here. Nadad nodded, turning to face her. We'll go, with or without his blessing, but we'll need a crew. Leave that to me, Astrid said with a sly smile. There are many in the village who yearn for adventure as we do. By tomorrow night we'll have our pick of the best. And supplies? Nadad asked, his mind already racing with plans. I'll speak with Helga the merchant. She owes me a favor and can be discreet. We'll have enough to last us months at sea. Nadad couldn't help but grin. This was why he had always admired Astrid. She was not only a fearsome warrior but a brilliant tactician as well. We'll need Bjorn, he added. His wisdom and connection to the gods will be invaluable. Astrid nodded in agreement. I'll speak with him tonight. Now go and prepare. We leave tomorrow, under cover of darkness. As Astrid turned to leave, Nadad caught her arm. Astrid, thank you. I couldn't do this without you. For a moment, her fierce demeanor softened. We're in this together, Nadad. Whatever lies across that sea, we'll face it as one. With a final nod, they parted ways, each heading off to make their preparations for the journey ahead. The next day passed in a blur of secret meetings and hushed preparations. Nadad kept to his usual routine, not wanting to arouse suspicion, but his mind was consumed with thoughts of the voyage to come. As night fell, he made his way to the docks, a small pack of essentials slung over his shoulder. To his amazement, he found not just Astrid and Bjorn waiting for him, but a crew of 20 eager men and women, all armed and ready for the journey. Supplies had already been loaded onto the longship, and the sail was unfurled, ready to catch the wind. "How did you manage all this?" Nadad whispered in awe to Astrid. She smirked, pride gleaming in her eyes. Never underestimate the power of a good story and the promise of adventure. These are all volunteers, ready to follow you into the unknown. Bjorn approached, leaning heavily on his staff. "The gods favor us, Nadad. I have performed the rituals and read the signs. Our journey will be perilous, but great destiny awaits us across the sea." Nadad nodded solemnly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He turned to address the assembled crew, keeping his voice low to avoid detection. "My friends, what we do tonight will be remembered in sagas for generations to come. We sail into the unknown, defying not just the dangers of the sea, but the orders of our Jarl. But in our hearts, we know this is the path we must take, for glory, for riches, and for the future of our people." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Nadad continued, his voice gaining strength. "Once we leave this fjord, there's no turning back. If any of you have doubts, now is the time to stay behind. No one will think less of you." He paused, but not a single person moved. Their faces were set with determination, eyes shining with excitement in the moonlight. "Very well," Nadad said, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Let's make history." As they began to board the ship, a shout rang out from the village. "Stop them! Traitors!" Håkon the Bold emerged from the shadows, a group of armed men at his back. "Nadad, I warned you, this defiance will not stand." Panic surged through the crew, but Nadad remained calm. "Everyone on board now," he commanded. As the last of the crew scrambled onto the ship, Nadad and Astrid took up positions at the stern, weapons drawn. "Håkon, we do this for the good of our people," Nadad called out. "One day you'll understand." "Understand treachery? Never!" Håkon roared, charging down the dock. But it was too late. The longship, propelled by skilled rowers, was already pulling away from the dock. Arrows whistled past them, splashing harmlessly into the dark waters. As they cleared the mouth of the fjord, the sail caught the wind, filling with a resounding snap. The ship surged forward, quickly leaving the angry shouts of Håkon and his men behind. Nadad stood at the prow, his heart pounding with exhilaration. The cool wind whipped at his face, carrying with it the promise of adventure. Behind him, Bjorn began to chant a prayer to Odin and Thor, asking for their protection on the perilous journey ahead. Astrid joined Nadad at the front of the ship, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Well, Captain," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice, "where do we go from here?" Nadad pointed west, towards the last fading light of the setting sun. "We follow the Raven's path, west, into the unknown, to whatever destiny awaits us." As the Norwegian coastline faded into the darkness behind them, Nadad felt a surge of emotion, fear, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of rightness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever wonders or terrors they might encounter, he knew in his heart that this was where he was meant to be. The longship cut through the waves, carrying its crew of brave explorers towards an uncertain future. The saga of Nadad, the discoverer of new lands, had begun. The longship, christened Raven's Wing by its crew, had been at sea for nearly a fortnight. The initial excitement of their daring escape had given way to the monotonous rhythm of life on the open ocean. Nadad stood at the helm, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of land or danger. The salt spray had crusted in his beard, and his muscles ached from the constant motion of the ship. Astrid approached, offering him a horn of water. "You should rest," she said, concern evident in her voice. "You've been at the helm since dawn." Nadad took a long drink before responding. "I can't. Every moment we're out here, we're in uncharted waters. One mistake could doom us all." Astrid placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and reassuring. "And if you collapse from exhaustion, where will that leave us? Trust your crew, Nadad. We're all in this together." Before he could argue further, a shout came from the crow's nest. "Storm clouds to the west!" Nadad's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the dark mass on the horizon. The air suddenly felt heavier, charged with an ominous energy. "All hands on deck," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the suddenly restless waves. "Secure the cargo and prepare for rough seas." The crew burst into action, their movements precise despite the growing unease. Bjorn the seer made his way to Nadad's side, his ancient eyes fixed on the approaching storm. "This is no ordinary tempest," the old man muttered, his gnarled hands gripping his staff tightly. "I sense the hand of the gods in this. We are being tested." Nadad nodded grimly. "Then we shall prove ourselves worthy. Bjorn, begin the rituals. We'll need all the divine favor we can get." As Bjorn began to chant, invoking the protection of Thor and Njord, the storm hit with a fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, and waves as tall as mountains threatened to swallow the Raven's Wing whole. Nadad gripped the helm with all his might, his muscles straining as he fought to keep the ship on course. "Hold fast," he shouted over the howling wind. "We've come too far to fail now." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the crew. A massive wave crashed over the side, sweeping 2 men off their feet. Without hesitation, Astrid dove after them, a rope tied securely around her waist. "Astrid!" Nadad cried out, his heart in his throat, as he watched her disappear into the churning sea. Agonizing seconds passed before her head broke the surface, one arm wrapped around an unconscious crewman. The other had managed to grab onto her, clinging for dear life. "Pull them in," Nadad ordered, unable to leave the helm. A group of sailors heaved on the rope, slowly dragging the 3 waterlogged figures back onto the deck. As soon as they were safe, Nadad called out, "Astrid, are you all right?" She coughed up seawater but managed a weak thumbs up. "It'll take more than a little wave to best me," she rasped, already moving to help the men she'd rescued. The storm raged on, each moment a battle for survival. The mast creaked ominously, threatening to snap under the relentless assault of the wind. Nadad knew they couldn't take much more. "Bjorn!" he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need the gods' help now." The old seer nodded, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. He raised his staff high, his voice rising in a chant that somehow carried over the chaos of the storm. "Njord, Lord of the Seas, hear our plea. Calm these waters, set our ship free. Thor, mighty thunderer, stay your wrath. Guide us safely along our path." As the last words left Bjorn's lips, a bolt of lightning struck the sea mere yards from the ship. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, miraculously, the winds began to die down. The waves, though still high, no longer threatened to overwhelm them. Nadad could scarcely believe his eyes as patches of clear sky began to appear overhead. "By Odin's eye," he whispered, "it worked." As the storm receded, leaving them battered but alive, a new wonder appeared in the sky. Ribbons of green and purple light danced across the heavens, casting an ethereal glow over the ship and its weary crew. "The Northern Lights," Astrid breathed, coming to stand beside Nadad. "I've never seen them so far from home." Bjorn joined them, his eyes fixed on the celestial display. "This is no coincidence," he said solemnly. "The gods speak to us through these lights. Our course is true, but great challenges lie ahead." Nadad nodded, feeling both exhilarated and humbled by their brush with death and the beauty that followed. "What do you see in the lights, Bjorn? What awaits us?" The old seer was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally he spoke, his voice distant as if coming from another world. I see a land of fire and ice where the very earth breathes. I see great hardships, but also the potential for glory beyond imagining. And he hesitated, a look of confusion crossing his weathered features. What is it? Astrid pressed, her hand unconsciously moving to the hilt of her axe. Bjorn shook his head, coming back to himself. There was something else. A darkness, a presence I've never encountered before. It waits for us in the land we seek. A chill ran down Nadad's spine that had nothing to do with the cold sea air. He was about to question Bjorn further when a shout came from the bow of the ship. Captain, you need to see this. Nadad rushed to the front of the ship, Astrid and Bjorn close behind. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The sea before them was changing, the familiar dark blue giving way to a lighter, almost milky color. What sorcery is this? One of the crew members whispered, fear evident in his voice. Nadad leaned over the side, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The water seemed thicker somehow, and there was a faint crackling sound coming from all around them. Suddenly, Astrid gasped. Look. She pointed to the bow of the ship, where a thin sheet of ice was beginning to form. Realization dawned on Nadad. We've sailed too far north, he said, his mind racing. The sea is beginning to freeze around us. Panic began to spread through the crew. We'll be trapped, someone shouted. We have to turn back. No. Nadad's voice cut through the growing chaos. We've come too far to turn back now. This is just another challenge to overcome. He turned to address the entire crew, his voice ringing with authority. Listen to me. We are Vikings, explorers of the unknown. This is why we set out on this journey, to face the impossible and conquer it. We will not be defeated by ice or storm or any other obstacle in our path. His words seemed to bolster the crew's spirits, but uncertainty still lingered in their eyes. Nadad knew he needed to act fast. Astrid, he called. Organize teams to break up the ice forming on the hull. Use whatever tools we have, axes, spears, anything with an edge. She nodded, immediately moving to carry out his orders. Bjorn, Nadad continued, consult the runes. We need to know if we're still on the right course. As the old seer shuffled off to perform his divinations, Nadad turned his attention to navigation. The stars were hidden behind a veil of mist, making it impossible to get his bearings. For hours, they fought against the encroaching ice, the sound of metal striking frozen water echoing across the eerily still sea. Nadad's arms ached from taking his turn at ice-breaking, but he refused to rest while his crew labored. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Bjorn approached Nadad with a grave expression. What news, old friend? Nadad asked, dreading the answer. Bjorn sighed heavily. The runes are unclear. They speak of a great change coming, but whether for good or ill I cannot say. However, he paused, his eyes meeting Nadad's. They are adamant that we must continue westward. Our destiny lies in that direction, no matter the perils we face. Nadad nodded, a mix of determination and fear settling in his gut. Then west we shall go, but how do we navigate through this ice field? As if in answer to his question, a haunting cry echoed across the water. The crew fell silent, straining to hear. The sound came again, closer this time. There, Astrid called out, pointing to a gap in the mist. A massive shape moved through the fog, its sleek body sliding effortlessly through the icy water. Whales, Nadad breathed in wonder. They must know safe passages through the ice. A plan formed in his mind. It was risky, perhaps even foolhardy, but it was their best chance. We follow the whales, he announced to the stunned crew. They'll lead us to open water. There were murmurs of disbelief and concern, but no one openly challenged the decision. They had come too far and faced too much to doubt their leader now. As the Raven's Wing carefully maneuvered through the ice, following the path carved by the great sea beasts, Nadad allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had survived a storm that should have sunk them, and now navigated waters no Viking had ever seen before. Whatever lay ahead, be it the promised land of fire and ice or some unknown horror, he knew that his crew could face it. The ship pressed on into uncharted waters, the haunting songs of the whales guiding them towards their destiny. The first chapter of their great adventure was ending, but Nadad knew in his heart that the true challenges, and perhaps the greatest rewards, still lay ahead. The Raven's Wing had been following the whales for days, weaving through treacherous ice fields and battling relentless, biting winds. The crew's spirits were as frosty as the air around them, their initial excitement long since frozen over by the harsh realities of their journey. Nadad stood at the prow, his eyes straining against the endless white horizon, searching for any sign of land. How much longer can we go on like this? Astrid's voice cut through the silence, her breath visible in the frigid air. She joined Nadad at the front of the ship, her normally fierce demeanor tempered by exhaustion and worry. Nadad turned to her, his face etched with lines of fatigue and determination. "As long as we must," he replied, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the howling wind. "We've come too far to turn back now." Astrid nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the hilt of her axe. "The crew is restless. Some are beginning to whisper that we're chasing a fool's dream." Before Nadad could respond, a shout came from the crow's nest. "Land ho! Land to the west!" The words electrified the ship. Crew members who moments ago had been huddled for warmth now rushed to the sides, straining to catch a glimpse of their destination. Nadad grabbed a spyglass and peered through it, his heart pounding. There, emerging from the mist like a vision from the sagas, was a coastline, unlike anything he had ever seen. Snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. But it was the shore itself that caught his attention, a stretch of black sand that stood in stark contrast to the white world around it. "By Odin's beard," Nadad breathed, lowering the spyglass. "We found it." Bjorn hobbled to Nadad's side, his ancient eyes alight with an inner fire. "The land of fire and ice," the old seer murmured, just as the visions foretold. Excitement rippled through the crew as they approached the shore. The whales that had guided them suddenly dove deep, their tails slapping the water's surface in what almost seemed like a farewell. As they drew closer, the true scale of the landscape became apparent. Jagged cliffs rose from the black sand beach, their faces scarred by wind and ice. Steam rose from cracks in the rocks, hinting at the geothermal activity beneath the frozen surface. "Prepare to make landfall," Nadad shouted, his voice carrying over the crashing waves. "Astrid, choose a landing party. We'll need to scout the area before bringing the ship in." Astrid nodded, quickly selecting a group of their most capable warriors and explorers. As the longship anchored a short distance from shore, the landing party lowered a smaller boat into the choppy waters. Nadad turned to Bjorn before joining the others. "Keep watch over the ship, old friend. If anything seems amiss, don't hesitate to leave. We'll find another way back if we must." Bjorn gripped Nadad's arm, his gnarled hand surprisingly strong. "Be wary, Nadad. This land is alive in ways we cannot fully comprehend. The gods watch us closely here." With a nod of understanding, Nadad climbed down into the boat. The short journey to shore was treacherous, with icy waves threatening to overturn them at every moment. But soon enough, the keel of their small craft scraped against the black sand, and Nadad became the first to set foot on this new land. As his boots sank slightly into the volcanic sand, Nadad felt a surge of emotion, pride, fear, and an overwhelming sense of awe. He knelt, scooping up a handful of the dark grains and letting them slip through his fingers. "In the name of Odin All-Father," he proclaimed, his voice carrying to his companions and beyond, to the ship waiting offshore, "I claim this land for our people. May it bring us glory and prosperity in the years to come." Astrid stepped up beside him, her eyes scanning the forbidding landscape. "What shall we call it, this place at the edge of the world?" Nadad stood, brushing the sand from his hands. He looked out at the snow-covered mountains, the steaming rocks, and the black shore. "Snaeland," he declared. the land of snow. As the landing party spread out to secure the immediate area, Nadad and Astrid began to explore further inland. The terrain was treacherous, with hidden crevasses and unstable ground that steamed and hissed ominously. "It's as if the land itself is trying to keep us out," Astrid muttered, carefully testing each step. Nadad nodded grimly. All the more reason to press on. Anything worth having never comes easily. They had gone perhaps a half-mile inland when a low rumble caught their attention. At first, Nadad thought it might be thunder, but the sound continued to grow, accompanied by a trembling in the ground beneath their feet. "Back to the shore!" Nadad shouted, grabbing Astrid's arm. "Now!" They ran, slipping and sliding on the icy ground as the rumbling intensified. Behind them, a geyser of boiling water and steam erupted from a crack in the earth, shooting high into the air with a deafening roar. As they reached the rest of the landing party on the beach, more geysers began to erupt further inland, creating a spectacular and terrifying display of nature's power. "By Thor's hammer," one of the warriors gasped. "What manner of place is this?" Nadad, breathing heavily from their sprint, managed a grim smile. "A land of extremes, it seems. Fire beneath the ice, waiting to break free." As the geysers subsided, leaving behind steaming pools and a lingering mist, the group cautiously approached one of the hot springs that had formed. Astrid knelt by the edge, testing the water with her hand. "It's warm," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Even with all this ice and snow around, the water is as warm as a summer day in Norway." Nadad nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. This could be invaluable for survival here, a source of heat and fresh water in this frozen land. As the day wore on, the landing party continued their exploration, mapping the coastline and identifying potential sites for a more permanent camp. The weather, which had been relatively calm upon their arrival, began to shift ominously. "A storm's coming," Astrid warned, eyeing the darkening sky. "We should get back to the ship while we still can." Nadad knew she was right, but something held him back. A feeling, an instinct he couldn't quite name. "Just a bit further," he urged. "There's something here. I can feel it." They pressed on along the coast, fighting against the rising wind. Snow began to fall, at first just a few flakes, but quickly intensifying into a blinding squall. Just as Nadad was about to admit defeat and order a retreat, the wind shifted, and through a momentary break in the storm he saw it. There, jutting out from the black sand beach, was a circle of standing stones. Ancient and weathered, they stood in silent testament to the fact that they were not the first to set foot on this land. "Astrid, look!" Nadad called out, pointing towards the monoliths. The shield maiden's eyes widened as she took in the sight. "Impossible," she breathed. "Who could have built this here, in this forsaken place?" As they approached the stone circle, the storm seemed to intensify, as if trying to keep them away. Snow whipped around them, stinging their exposed skin and making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Nadad reached out, his gloved hand touching one of the ancient stones. As his fingers made contact, a jolt of energy seemed to pass through him. Visions flashed before his eyes. Great halls of ice and fire, battles against monstrous creatures, and a looming darkness that threatened to swallow everything. He stumbled back, gasping, only to find Astrid supporting him. "Nadad, what happened? What did you see?" Before he could answer, a bone-chilling howl cut through the storm. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. Not wolf, not bear, but something altogether more terrifying. "We need to leave," Nadad said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." They ran back towards the landing site, the otherworldly howl seeming to follow them. The rest of the landing party was already preparing the boat, sensing the danger in the air. As they pushed off from shore, Nadad looked back at the land they were leaving behind. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out a massive, shadowy form moving among the standing stones. It turned, and for a moment, Nadad swore he saw gleaming, intelligent eyes staring right at him. Then the storm closed in, and Snæland disappeared from view. Back on the Raven's Wing, as they fought to navigate through the worsening weather, Bjorn approached Nadad. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the old seer asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The guardian of this land." Nadad nodded, unable to shake the chill that had settled in his bones. "What was it, Bjorn? What awaits us in this place?" Bjorn's eyes were distant, seeing things beyond the physical world. "The old powers still hold sway here, Nadad. Jötnar, the frost giants of our legends. This land is their domain, and they will not give it up easily." As the ship battled against the storm, seeking safer waters to weather out the tempest, Nadad stood at the helm, his mind reeling from all they had discovered. Snaeland was more than just a new land to explore and settle. It was a realm of myth and magic where the old stories came to life. He knew then that their real journey was just beginning. The challenge would not just be surviving in this harsh land, but in navigating the ancient powers that called it home. As the Raven's Wing plunged through the icy waves, Nadad silently vowed to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, for the glory of his people and the call of destiny that had led them to this frozen shore. The storm that had driven the Raven's Wing from the shores of Snaeland raged for 3 days and nights. When it finally abated, Nadad and his crew found themselves in unfamiliar waters, the coastline they had discovered now lost beyond the horizon. The air was thick with tension as the Vikings debated their next move. "We should return to Norway," Gunnar, a burly warrior with a red beard, argued. "We've seen the new land. Let's bring word back to our people and return with a proper settlement party." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crew, but Nadad shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "We came here for a reason. The gods guided us to Snaeland, and I won't turn back until we've properly explored it." Astrid stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Nadad's right. We're Vikings, not cowards. Are we to run at the first sign of danger?" The crew fell silent, chastened by her words. Nadad nodded gratefully to Astrid before addressing the group. "We'll make for the coast again. This time we'll be better prepared for whatever awaits us." As the Raven's Wing turned back toward Snaeland, Nadad pulled Bjorn aside. "The visions I saw at the stone circle," he said in a low voice. "They spoke of great danger, but also of something else. A power beyond anything I've ever known." The old seer nodded sagely. "The Jötnar, the frost giants of our legends, are not mere stories, Nadad. In this land, they are as real as you or I. We must tread carefully." Nadad's brow furrowed. "How do we face such beings? Our weapons seem useless against powers like that." Bjorn placed a gnarled hand on Nadad's shoulder. "With wisdom, courage, and the favor of the gods, I'll prepare protective runes for our landing party. It's not much, but it may give us an edge." As they neared the coast of Snaeland once more, the landscape seemed even more forbidding than before. Jagged ice formations jutted from the sea like the teeth of some great beast, and a thick mist clung to the shore, obscuring their view. Nadad stood at the prow, his keen eyes searching for a safe place to land. Suddenly, he spotted a narrow inlet, sheltered from the worst of the wind and waves. "There," he called out. "We'll make landfall in that cove." The crew skillfully navigated the treacherous waters, bringing the Raven's Wing into the relative safety of the inlet. As they dropped anchor, an eerie silence fell over the ship. The mist seemed to deaden all sound, creating an atmosphere of unnatural stillness. "I don't like this," Astrid muttered, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her axe. "It feels like we're being watched." Nadad nodded grimly. "Stay alert. Gunnar, you'll stay with the ship and a skeleton crew. The rest of us will explore inland." As the landing party prepared to disembark, Bjorn approached each member, pressing a small stone etched with runes into their hands. "Keep these close," he instructed. "They may offer some protection against the old powers of this land." The group made their way ashore, the black sand crunching under their boots. The mist swirled around them, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of the harsh landscape beyond. Towering glaciers, steaming hot springs, and fields of razor-sharp volcanic rock. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Nadad held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. "Listen," he whispered. At first, there was only silence. Then, carried on the wind, came a sound that made their blood run cold. A deep, rumbling voice speaking in a language none of them understood. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The Jötnar," Bjorn breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "They know we're here." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the ice, steam hissing from the fissures. The mist thickened, swirling around them with unnatural speed. "Back to the ship," Nadad shouted. But as they turned, they realized with horror that they could no longer see the way they had come. The mist had become an impenetrable wall, cutting them off from retreat. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed out of the fog. It was humanoid, but far larger than any man, easily the height of 3 Vikings standing on each other's shoulders. Its skin was the color of glacial ice, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire. The frost giant regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. When it spoke, its voice rumbled like an avalanche. "Why have you come to our realm, little ones? Do you seek your doom?" Nadad stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "We come in peace, Great One. We are explorers seeking new lands for our people." The giant's laughter shook the very air around them. "Peace? There is no peace for mortals in the realm of the Jötnar. Turn back now, or face the consequences of your trespass." Astrid moved to Nadad's side, her axe at the ready. "We are Vikings," she declared defiantly. "We do not turn back from a challenge." The frost giant's eyes narrowed. "Such bravery," it mused, "or perhaps foolishness. Very well, little Vikings. If you wish to prove yourselves worthy of our realm, you must face a trial." With a wave of its massive hand, the mist parted, revealing a treacherous path leading up the side of a nearby mountain. At the summit, they could see a glowing object, a golden apple not unlike those said to grow in the gardens of the gods. "Retrieve the apple of Idun from the peak," the giant instructed. "Do this, and you may stay. Fail, and your bones will join those of the other foolish mortals who dared to enter our domain." As quickly as it had appeared, the frost giant vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill in the air. The Vikings stood in stunned silence for a moment before Nadad spoke. "We have no choice," he said grimly. "We must attempt the trial." Bjorn shook his head. "It's too dangerous, Nadad. This is no ordinary mountain. The very elements will be against us." But Nadad's mind was made up. "Astrid, Bjorn, and Eric," he said, naming one of their strongest warriors. "You'll come with me. The rest of you, find shelter and wait. If we're not back by nightfall, make for the ship and return home." As they began their ascent, the true nature of the challenge became clear. The path was narrow and treacherous, with sudden drops and patches of ice that threatened to send them plummeting to their deaths. Fierce winds buffeted them, carrying stinging snow and ice that cut at their exposed skin. Halfway up the mountain, they encountered their first true obstacle, a deep crevasse that cut across their path, too wide to jump. "Now what?" Eric growled, peering into the icy depths. Nadad scanned the area, his mind racing. Then he spotted it, a series of ice formations that looked almost like stepping stones leading across the chasm. "There," he pointed. "We'll have to cross on those." Astrid looked dubious. "They don't look stable. One wrong move and we'll fall to our deaths." Nadad nodded grimly. "I'll go first. If I make it, follow my path exactly." With heart-pounding intensity, Nadad began to cross. Each step was a test of balance and nerve, the ice creaking ominously beneath his weight. More than once, a foothold crumbled just as he moved to the next, sending shards of ice tumbling into the abyss below. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Nadad reached the other side. He turned back to his companions, his face pale but determined. "Come on," he called. "It can be done." One by one, they made the perilous crossing. Bjorn, despite his age, showed surprising agility, muttering protective charms with each step. Eric, the heaviest of them, caused several of the ice formations to crack alarmingly, but managed to leap to safety at the last moment. Astrid was the last to cross. She was nearly to the other side, when the ice beneath her feet gave way entirely. With a cry of alarm, she began to fall. Without hesitation, Nadad threw himself forward, catching her arm just as she disappeared over the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought the momentum would pull them both into the chasm. But then Eric was there, his strong hands gripping Nadad's legs, anchoring them both. With a mighty heave, they pulled Astrid to safety. She lay on the ice, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with the realization of how close she had come to death. "Thank you," she gasped, gripping Nadad's hand tightly. He helped her to her feet, his own heart still racing. "We're in this together," he reminded her. "All of us." As they continued their ascent, the air grew thin, making each step a struggle. The wind howled around them, carrying whispers that seemed almost like words, taunts and threats from the Jötnar, testing their resolve. Finally, after what felt like days but could only have been hours, they reached the summit. There, on a pedestal of ice, sat the golden apple, glowing with an inner light that seemed to promise warmth and vitality. Nadad approached it cautiously, remembering all too well the warnings in the old stories about the dangers of touching divine objects. But as his hand closed around the apple, he felt only a surge of strength and clarity. "We've done it," he breathed, holding the apple aloft for his companions to see. But their triumph was short-lived. As Nadad turned to begin their descent, the mountain itself seemed to come alive. The ice beneath their feet began to crack and shift, and a rumbling voice filled the air. "You have passed the test, little Vikings," the voice of the frost giant boomed. "But passing a test does not make you worthy of our realm. Now survive our wrath." With a deafening crack, the peak of the mountain began to collapse. Avalanches of snow and ice cascaded down all sides, threatening to sweep them away. "Run!" Nadad shouted, clutching the golden apple tightly. As they fled down the mountainside, narrowly avoiding death at every turn, Nadad realized that their true trial was only just beginning. They had proven their bravery and skill, but now they would have to prove their right to exist in this land of giants and gods. The Raven's Wing and its crew had found Snaeland, but surviving it would be a challenge unlike any they had ever faced. As they raced against the fury of the mountain, Nadad silently vowed that they would meet that challenge, no matter the cost. The saga of the Vikings in this new land was only just beginning, and he intended to see it through to whatever end awaited them. The descent from the mountain was a blur of terror and exhilaration. Nadad, Astrid, Bjorn, and Eric barely stayed ahead of the avalanche, their lungs burning with each desperate breath of the thin, icy air. As they neared the base of the mountain, Nadad spotted a dark opening in the rock face. "There!" he shouted over the roar of the falling ice and snow. "A cave!" They dove into the narrow opening just as the full force of the avalanche thundered past, the ground shaking beneath their feet. For several long moments they huddled in the darkness, the sound of their ragged breathing drowned out by the cacophony outside. As the rumbling subsided, Astrid fumbled with her pack, producing a small oil lamp. The flickering light revealed a cavern that stretched deep into the mountain, its walls glittering with ice crystals. "By Odin's eye," Eric breathed, his voice echoing in the chamber. That was too close. Nadad nodded grimly, still clutching the golden apple they had retrieved from the mountain's peak. "We're alive, but we're far from safe. We need to find a way back to the ship." Bjorn, his face etched with lines of exhaustion, peered out of the cave entrance. "The storm is getting worse," he reported. "Night is falling, and with it, temperatures that would freeze the blood in our veins. We cannot leave this shelter until morning, at the earliest." A heavy silence fell over the group as the reality of their situation sank in. They were trapped, deep in the heart of a hostile land, with dwindling supplies and unknown dangers lurking in the darkness. "We should explore the cave," Astrid suggested, her practical nature asserting itself. There might be another way out, or at least a more defensible position. Nadad agreed, and they set off into the depths of the cavern, the weak light of their lamp casting long shadows on the icy walls. As they ventured deeper, the air grew noticeably warmer, and a faint sulphurous smell reached their nostrils. Hot springs, Bjorn explained, his eyes gleaming with interest. The fire beneath the ice. This could be our salvation. They soon emerged into a larger chamber, where steaming pools of water bubbled up from cracks in the rocky floor. The heat was a blessed relief after the biting cold outside, but Nadad couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something ancient and powerful. We'll make camp here, he decided, setting down his pack. The warmth will keep us alive through the night. As they settled in, rationing out their meager supplies, a tense silence fell over the group. The events of the day, the encounter with the frost giant, the perilous climb, the near-death escape from the avalanche, had left them all shaken. Eric was the first to speak, his voice low and troubled. What are we doing here, Nadad? This land, it's not meant for us. We should never have come. Nadad looked up sharply, sensing the fear and doubt that threatened to unravel their resolve. We came because we are Vikings, he said firmly. Explorers, conquerors. This land may be harsh, but it's also rich with possibilities. Think of the stories they'll tell of us back home, the first to settle in this realm of gods and giants. Astrid nodded in agreement, but her eyes were clouded with concern. And what of these beings we've encountered? The frost giants are not myth here, but reality. How can we hope to stand against such power? Bjorn, who had been quietly etching protective runes around their campsite, looked up. With cunning, courage, and the favor of our own gods, he said. The Jötnar are powerful, yes, but they are not infallible. Remember the old tales. Even Thor himself wrestled with their kind and emerged victorious. As night fell outside the cave, plunging Snaeland into a darkness deeper than any they had known in Norway, the group huddled closer to the warmth of the hot springs. Nadad produced the golden apple they had retrieved, its soft glow casting a comforting light. What do you make of this, Bjorn? He asked, holding it out to the old seer. Is it truly the apple of Idun? Bjorn examined the fruit carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. It bears a strong resemblance to the apples of legend, he mused, said to grant youth and vitality to the gods themselves. But to take a bite would be unwise. The gifts of the gods often come with a heavy price. Nadad nodded, carefully wrapping the apple in a cloth and stowing it in his pack. We'll keep it safe then. It may prove useful in bargaining with the beings of this land. As the night wore on, they took turns standing watch, ever alert for any sign of danger. The cave was eerily quiet, save for the bubbling of the hot springs and the occasional crack of shifting ice. But in that silence, each of them fought their own internal battles against fear, doubt, and the creeping cold that seemed to seep into their very bones. Astrid, unable to sleep, joined Nadad on his watch. They sat side by side, their shoulders touching, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Do you ever regret leading us here? She asked softly, her breath visible in the cool air. Nadad was quiet for a long moment before answering. I regret the hardships we've faced, the dangers I've led our people into, he admitted. But regret the journey itself? No. We've seen wonders that no other Viking has laid eyes on. We've walked in the realm of giants and gods. Whatever happens, we've already achieved something great. Astrid smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. You always know what to say to rally our spirits, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Not always, Nadad replied with a wry smile. But I have to try. As leader, it's my responsibility to keep us going, no matter how dark things seem. Their conversation was interrupted by a low rumbling sound, different from the bubbling of the hot springs. Both warriors tensed, hands moving to their weapons. What was that? Astrid whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. The rumbling came again, louder this time, accompanied by a tremor that shook loose small fragments of ice from the cavern ceiling. "Wake the others," Nadad ordered, rising to his feet. "Something's coming." As Eric and Bjorn stirred, the tremors intensified. Cracks began to appear in the cavern walls, and the hot springs bubbled more violently. "The cave is collapsing," Eric shouted, grabbing his axe. "We need to get out." But as they turned to flee, they found their exit blocked. A massive figure filled the entrance to their chamber, a frost giant, its icy skin gleaming in the dim light, its eyes burning with an inner fire. "So," the giant rumbled, its voice shaking loose more ice from above, "you little mortals have survived our first trial. Impressive, but do not think this makes you welcome in our realm." Nadad stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword, but his voice steady. "We mean no disrespect, Great One. We seek only to explore and understand this land." The frost giant's laughter was like the cracking of a glacier. "Understand? You are but insects to us, your lives a mere blink in the long ages of this world. What could you hope to understand?" Astrid, her patience wearing thin, spoke up. "We understand courage, honor, and the will to survive against all odds. Are these not qualities respected even among the Jötnar?" The giant's eyes narrowed, focusing on Astrid with newfound interest. "You speak boldly, Shield Maiden. Perhaps there is more to you mortals than we first thought." With a wave of its massive hand, the tremors subsided and the cracks in the cavern walls began to seal themselves. "You have earned a reprieve, little Vikings. Rest now, for when the sun rises you will face a challenge that will test not just your strength and courage, but the very essence of who you are." As suddenly as it had appeared, the frost giant vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill in the air and a sense of foreboding that settled over the group like a heavy cloak. "What did he mean by that?" Eric asked, his voice tight with tension. "What kind of challenge awaits us?" Bjorn shook his head, his eyes distant. "The ways of the Jötnar are mysterious and often cruel. We must be prepared for anything." As they settled back into their makeshift camp, sleep eluded them. Each was lost in their own thoughts, contemplating the trials they had faced and the unknown challenges that lay ahead. Nadad sat apart from the others, turning the golden apple over in his hands. Its soft glow seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it held the key to their survival in this harsh land. As the long night of Snaeland wore on, Nadad made a silent vow. They would face whatever challenge the frost giants set before them. They would prove their worth not just as Vikings, but as beings worthy of walking in this realm of myth and magic. And no matter the cost, he would see his people safely through this trial and back to the shores of their homeland. The cave fell silent once more, but it was a silence charged with anticipation. In the darkness, 4 Vikings waited for the dawn, their hearts steeled for the test that would determine their fate in this land of ice and fire. The first light of dawn crept into the cave, casting long shadows across the sleeping forms of Nadad and his companions. The night had been restless, filled with uneasy dreams of frost giants and looming challenges. As consciousness returned, so did the weight of their predicament. Nadad was the first to stir, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. The events of the previous day came rushing back: the perilous climb, the golden apple, the avalanche, and the frost giant's ominous promise of a test to come. "Wake up," he called to the others, his voice echoing in the cavern. "We need to be ready for whatever this day brings." As the group gathered their meager supplies and prepared to face the unknown, a low rumbling filled the air. The cave walls began to shimmer and melt away like ice in the spring thaw, revealing a vast, otherworldly landscape beyond. They found themselves standing on a narrow ridge of black volcanic rock, steam rising from cracks in the earth. To their left, a field of ice stretched as far as the eye could see, glittering with an unnatural blue light. To their right, a sea of lava bubbled and churned, casting an angry red glow across the barren terrain. "By Thor's hammer," Eric breathed, his eyes wide with awe and fear. "What manner of place is this?" Before anyone could respond, A booming voice filled the air, seeming to come from the very elements around them. "Vikings of Midgard," the voice of the frost giant thundered, "you stand at the crossroads of fire and ice, the very essence of Snaeland. Your challenge is simple, yet perilous. Cross this land and reach the portal at its heart. Do this, and you will have proven yourselves worthy of our realm." Astrid, ever practical, scanned the horizon. "I see no portal," she said, her hand shielding her eyes from the glare of ice and fire. "How are we to know where to go?" As if in answer, a pillar of swirling energy erupted in the far distance, where the fields of ice and fire met in a clash of steam and smoke. "There's our destination," Nadod said grimly. "But the path to it will not be easy." Bjorn, who had been quietly observing their surroundings, spoke up. "We must choose our route carefully," he warned. "The ice field may seem safer, but it hides deadly crevasses. The lava field offers solid ground, but one misstep could mean a fiery death." Nadod nodded, weighing their options. "We'll skirt the edge between ice and fire," he decided. "It's risky, but it gives us the best chance of adapting to whatever challenges we face." As they set out, the true nature of their trial became apparent. The landscape was in constant flux, with sheets of ice suddenly cracking and giving way to bubbling lava, while jets of steam erupted without warning, threatening to scald them. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Eric, bringing up the rear, let out a startled cry. "Look! Behind us!" The group turned to see that the path they had traversed was disappearing, consumed by the encroaching elements. There would be no turning back. "Keep moving," Nadod urged, trying to keep the fear from his voice. "We have no choice but to press on." As they continued their treacherous journey, each Viking faced their own personal trials. Eric, the strongest of them, found his brute strength tested as he helped the others across particularly dangerous stretches. Astrid's keen eye and quick reflexes saved them more than once from sudden eruptions of steam or lava. Bjorn, despite his age, showed remarkable resilience. His knowledge of runes and the old ways proved invaluable as he muttered protective charms that seemed to calm the volatile elements around them. Nadod, for his part, bore the weight of leadership. Every decision, every chosen path could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The golden apple, still secure in his pack, seemed to grow heavier with each step, a constant reminder of the power and danger that surrounded them. As they neared the halfway point of their journey, a new challenge emerged. The narrow path they had been following suddenly widened into a vast open plain where ice and fire swirled together in a chaotic dance. "How are we supposed to cross that?" Astrid asked, her usual confidence wavering. Nadod studied the terrain, his mind racing. Then he noticed something. Amid the swirling elements, there were moments when patches of solid ground appeared, if only for a few seconds. "We'll have to time our movements perfectly," he explained. "Watch the patterns, wait for the right moment, then move as quickly as you can to the next safe spot." It was a harrowing crossing. They moved in short, desperate bursts, diving from one temporary sanctuary to the next. More than once, one of them nearly fell, saved only by the quick actions of their companions. Halfway across the plain, disaster struck. A particularly violent eruption of lava caught them off guard, separating Nadod from the others. He found himself stranded on a small island of black rock, surrounded by a sea of molten fire. "Nadod!" Astrid cried out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the elements. He looked around frantically, searching for a way to rejoin his companions. The heat was intense, making it hard to breathe or think clearly. In that moment of desperation, Nadod's hand brushed against his pack, and he felt the smooth surface of the golden apple. Without fully understanding why, he pulled out the mystical fruit. As soon as it was exposed to the air, it began to glow brightly, pulsing with an inner light. The chaotic elements around him seemed to respond, the lava cooling and the ice melting to form a narrow but passable bridge. "Quickly!" he shouted to the others. "I don't know how long this will last." They raced across the magical pathway, reuniting on the far side of the plain, just as the apple's glow faded and the bridge dissolved back into the swirling chaos. "How did you do that?" Eric asked, his voice filled with awe. Nadod shook his head, still trying to process what had happened. I'm not sure. It was the apple. It has more power than we realized." Bjorn eyed the now dormant fruit with a mixture of reverence and concern. "The gifts of the gods are not to be used lightly, Nadod. We must be cautious." As they caught their breath and prepared to continue their journey, a bone-chilling roar echoed across the landscape. From the swirling mists ahead emerged a monstrous figure, a creature with the lower body of a serpent and the upper body of a frost giant, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. "You have come far, little mortals," the creature hissed, its voice like ice cracking. "But your journey ends here. I am Jormungandr, son of Loki, and guardian of this realm's heart. None shall pass without defeating me in combat." The Vikings exchanged glances, their faces pale but determined. They had come too far to turn back now. Nadod stepped forward, his sword drawn. "We did not come seeking battle, great Jormungandr," he said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "But if combat is the only way forward, then so be it. We will face you with honor and courage." The serpent giant laughed, a sound like an avalanche. "Honor and courage? Admirable traits, but they will not save you from my wrath." With surprising speed for its massive size, Jormungandr attacked. Its tail lashed out, sending shards of ice flying towards the Vikings. They dove for cover, the frozen projectiles whistling past their heads. Astrid was the first to counterattack, her axe flashing in the strange light as she darted in to strike at the creature's scaly hide. Her blow landed, but seemed to do little damage against the monster's thick skin. Eric roared a battle cry, charging forward with his massive warhammer. He struck Jormungandr's serpentine lower body with all his might, causing the creature to howl in pain and anger. Bjorn, hanging back from the direct combat, began to chant, his voice rising above the din of battle. Ancient words of power echoed across the battlefield, and the Vikings felt a surge of strength and speed course through their bodies. Nadod, emboldened by Bjorn's magic, saw an opening. As Jormungandr reared back to strike at Eric, Nadod darted in, his sword aimed at the junction where the giant's humanoid torso met its serpent body. But Jormungandr was faster than they had anticipated. Its massive hand swatted Nadod aside, sending him flying. He landed hard, the golden apple tumbling from his pack and rolling across the ground. Time seemed to slow as the apple came to rest at the edge of a pool of lava. Nadod, dazed from the impact, watched in horror as the mystical fruit began to sink into the molten rock. "The apple!" he cried out, struggling to his feet. "We can't lose it." Without hesitation, Astrid dove for the sinking apple, her hand plunging into the lava. She screamed in pain but emerged clutching the golden fruit, her arm blackened and blistered. In that moment of distraction, Jormungandr struck. Its massive tail swept towards the wounded Astrid, promising to crush her. "No!" Nadod shouted, his voice raw with emotion. Without thinking, he threw himself between Astrid and the oncoming attack, bracing for the impact. But the blow never came. A blinding light erupted from the golden apple in Astrid's hand, enveloping both her and Nadod. When it faded, they stood unharmed, their wounds healed, and a shimmering barrier of energy surrounding them. Jormungandr recoiled, hissing in pain and confusion. "The power of Idun," it growled. "How came you by such a treasure?" Nadod, still marveling at their miraculous salvation, stepped forward. "We claimed it fairly as part of the challenge set before us by the frost giants. We seek not to conquer or destroy, but to prove ourselves worthy of this land." The serpent giant regarded them silently for a long moment, its ancient eyes unreadable. Then, to the Vikings' amazement, it began to laugh. Not the mocking laughter of before, but a sound of genuine amusement and perhaps respect. "Well played, little Vikings," Jormungandr said, its voice losing some of its menace. "You have shown not just strength and courage, but wisdom and compassion. Perhaps there is more to your kind than we first believed." With a gesture of its massive hand, Jörmungandr opened a portal of swirling energy behind it. You have earned the right to enter the heart of Snaeland. Go now, and face your final trial. But be warned, the greatest challenges often come not from without, but from within. As the serpent giant slithered away, disappearing into the mists from which it had emerged, Nadad and his companions stood in stunned silence. They had survived battles with the elements and mythical monsters, but what awaited them beyond the portal? Gathering their strength and resolve, the four Vikings stepped towards the shimmering gateway. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, their bonds forged stronger than ever in the crucible of fire and ice. As they passed through the portal, the world around them dissolved into a whirl of light and energy. The saga of Nadad and his crew had reached a turning point, but their greatest test was yet to come. The swirling energies of the portal subsided, and Nadad, Astrid, Eric, and Bjorn found themselves standing on a vast, snow-covered plain. The air was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the chaotic landscape they had just left behind. In the distance, a majestic ice palace rose against the horizon, its spires glittering in the pale sunlight. By Odin's beard, Eric breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. Is this the heart of Snaeland? Bjorn nodded solemnly, his gnarled hands gripping his staff. Aye, the seat of power for the Jötnar. We stand where few mortals have ever tread. As they took in their surroundings, a deep rumbling voice echoed across the plain. Welcome, Vikings of Midgard, to the realm of eternal winter. From the direction of the ice palace, a procession of frost giants approached. At their head was a figure even more massive and regal than the others, clearly their leader. His crown of icicles glinted menacingly, and his eyes held the wisdom and cruelty of ages. I am Thrym, king of the frost giants, the leader announced as they drew near. You have survived our trials and proven yourselves. Interesting, but do not think this grants you any special favor. You are still intruders in our domain. Nadad stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, but his voice steady and respectful. Great Thrym, we come seeking neither conquest nor conflict. We are explorers drawn to your land by the call of adventure and the will of our gods. Thrym's laughter boomed across the plain, shaking loose small avalanches from nearby peaks. The will of your gods? Your petty Aesir have no power here, little Viking. This is the realm of the Jötnar, and we bow to no one. Astrid, her patience wearing thin, spoke up. We have faced your challenges and emerged victorious. We have shown courage, strength, and wisdom. What more must we do to prove our worth? The frost giant king's eyes narrowed, focusing on Astrid with newfound interest. Spirited, this one, he mused. Very well. If you truly wish to prove yourselves, then face us in combat. Show us that the blood of the old heroes still runs in your veins. Before Nadad could respond, a commotion from behind caught their attention. To their shock, they saw a group of fellow Vikings approaching across the plain, led by a tall, imposing figure with a blood-red beard. Eric Bloodaxe, Nadad muttered, recognizing the notorious warrior. What in hell's name is he doing here? Eric Bloodaxe and his crew reached them, their weapons already drawn. Well, well, Bloodaxe sneered, if it isn't Nadad the fool and his band of dreamers. Fancy meeting you here at the edge of the world. Thrym watched the interaction with amusement. Ah, more little Vikings come to play. How delightful. Perhaps we shall have a proper battle after all. Nadad turned to face Bloodaxe, his voice low and urgent. Eric, listen to me. This is not the time for old rivalries. We face something far greater than our petty squabbles. But Bloodaxe's eyes were gleaming with a dangerous light. Oh, I think this is the perfect time, Nadad. I've waited years for a chance to prove once and for all who the greatest Viking explorer truly is. And with the realm of the frost giants as our prize, the stakes have never been higher. Thrym's laughter once again shook the icy landscape. A contest between Viking crews? This promises to be most entertaining. Very well, let it be so. Prove your worth not just against us, but against each other. The victors may claim the right to treat with us as equals. Nadad's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this dangerous situation. But before he could speak, Astrid stepped forward, her axe gleaming in the cold light. If it's a battle you want, Eric Bloodaxe, then a battle you shall have. But know this, we fight not just for glory, but for the future of our people. The wonders and riches of Snaeland could secure prosperity for generations of Vikings to come. Bloodaxe spat on the snow. Pretty words, Shield Maiden. But in the end, it's strength that decides the fate of nations. And my crew is stronger, fiercer, and more deserving of this prize than your ragtag band could ever be. As tensions rose between the two Viking groups, Thrym raised his massive hand for silence. The terms are set. You will battle not just each other, but the very elements of our realm. The first to reach the summit of the Great Glacier and claim the Ice Crown will be declared victorious. He pointed to a towering wall of ice in the distance, its peak lost in the swirling clouds above. The path will not be easy. You will face treacherous terrain, bitter cold, and the guardians of our realm. Many of you may not survive. Nadad exchanged glances with his companions. They were exhausted from their previous trials, outnumbered by Bloodaxe's crew, and now faced with an almost impossible challenge. But in their eyes, he saw not defeat, but determination. We accept your challenge, King Thrym, Nadad declared, his voice carrying across the snowy plain. And we vow to face it with honor, courage, and the strength of our ancestors. Bloodaxe sneered, already turning towards the distant glacier. Save your honor, Nadad. In the end, only victory matters. As both crews prepared for the grueling climb ahead, Bjorn pulled Nadad aside. The golden apple, he whispered urgently. Its power may be our only advantage. Use it wisely, for I fear we have not yet seen the full extent of its gifts, or its dangers. Nadad nodded grimly, feeling the weight of the mystical fruit in his pack. He knew that the old seer's words held truth. The apple was a wild card, a power they didn't fully understand. But in the face of such overwhelming odds, it might be their only hope. The climb began in earnest, both Viking crews racing towards the base of the Great Glacier. The frost giants watched with detached amusement, occasionally causing avalanches or conjuring icy obstacles to further challenge the mortals who dared to prove themselves in their realm. As they ascended, the true nature of the challenge became apparent. The glacier was not merely a mountain of ice, but a living, shifting entity. Crevasses opened without warning, bridges of ice formed and crumbled in moments, and bitter winds threatened to sweep climbers to their doom. Nadad's crew, though smaller, worked together with a synchronicity born of their shared trials. Eric's strength came in handy as he carved handholds in the sheer ice walls. Astrid's agility allowed her to scout ahead, finding the safest paths through the treacherous terrain. Bjorn, despite his age, never faltered, his ancient wisdom and knowledge of runes proving invaluable in avoiding magical traps laid by the frost giants. Bloodaxe's larger crew initially made faster progress, their greater numbers allowing them to brute force their way up the glacier. But as the climb grew more perilous, their lack of cohesion began to show. Arguments broke out over the best route, and more than once a careless climber triggered traps that cost them dearly in time and lives. Halfway up the glacier, disaster struck. A massive ice bridge, spanning a seemingly bottomless chasm, began to crumble just as Nadad's crew was crossing. Eric, bringing up the rear, found himself stranded as the last section of the bridge gave way. "Eric!" Nadad shouted, reaching out futilely as his friend began to fall. In that moment of desperation, Nadad remembered the golden apple. Without hesitation, he pulled it from his pack and held it high. "Idun, goddess of youth and vitality, hear my plea," he cried out. "Grant us the strength to overcome this trial." The apple began to glow with an intense golden light. Tendrils of energy shot out, enveloping Eric and pulling him to safety. As the light faded, Nadad and his companions found themselves reinvigorated, their fatigue and injuries from the climb melting away. Bloodaxe, witnessing this miraculous event from further up the glacier, let out a roar of fury. "Cheaters!" he bellowed. "You dare use godly artifacts to gain an advantage? This battle was to be decided by mortal strength alone." But even as he raged, the glacier seemed to respond to the apple's power. The path ahead of Nadad's crew became smoother, more navigable, while Bloodaxe's team found themselves facing ever more treacherous obstacles. As they neared the summit, the two crews were neck and neck. The ice crown, a creation of pure, shimmering ice, was visible just ahead. With a final burst of speed, both Nadad and Bloodaxe lunged for the prize. Their hands closed around the crown simultaneously. For a moment they grappled, teetering on the edge of the summit. Then, with a sickening crack, the ice beneath their feet gave way. As they fell, time seemed to slow. Nadad saw the fear in Bloodaxe's eyes, the realization that their rivalry had brought them to this moment of shared peril. Without thinking, he reached out, grasping Bloodaxe's arm even as they plummeted towards the unforgiving ice below. Once again, the golden apple flared to life, its power enveloping both Vikings in a cocoon of protective energy. They landed softly on a ledge far below the summit, the ice crown clutched between them. For a long moment they stared at each other, panting and bewildered by their survival. Then slowly, Bloodaxe's grip on the crown loosened. "Take it," he said gruffly, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You saved my life when you could have let me fall. That's worth more than any crown or kingdom." As Nadad's hand closed around the ice crown, a thunderous applause erupted around them. The frost giants, led by King Thrym, had materialized on the ledge. "Well fought, little Vikings," Thrym boomed, a hint of genuine admiration in his voice. "You have proven yourselves not just strong and cunning, but also capable of rising above your own petty conflicts. Perhaps there is hope for your kind after all." With a wave of his massive hand, Thrym transported them all back to the snowy plain where their challenge had begun. There, surrounded by the awe-inspiring landscape of Snaeland, Nadad raised the ice crown high. "We came here as explorers and adventurers," he declared, his voice carrying to all assembled, giants and Vikings alike. "We fought not just for glory, but for the right to learn from this realm, to build bridges between our peoples. Let this victory mark not an end, but a beginning. A new era of cooperation between the realms of men and giants." As murmurs of agreement rose from both Vikings and frost giants, Nadad knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. They had won the right to stay in Snaeland, but now they would have to prove that mortals and giants could coexist, learn from each other, and perhaps even forge a lasting peace. The saga of Nadad and his crew had taken an unexpected turn, but as he looked at the faces of his companions, tired but triumphant, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as true Vikings and pioneers of a new age. The days following the great challenge on the glacier were filled with a tense, uneasy peace. Nadad and his crew, along with Eric Bloodaxe's reformed group, had been granted permission to establish a small settlement at the base of the great glacier. The frost giants, while not openly hostile, remained aloof and watchful. As the Vikings worked to build shelters against the bitter cold, Nadad couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of Snaeland's mysteries. The golden apple, now safely hidden away, weighed heavily on his mind. One crisp morning, as the pale sun struggled to break through the perpetual mist, Astrid approached Nadad with news. "The hunting party has returned," she reported, her breath visible in the frigid air. "They've found something strange. You need to see this." Intrigued, Nadad followed her to the edge of their fledgling settlement. There, a group of Vikings huddled around something half buried in the snow. As they parted to let him through, Nadad's eyes widened in surprise. Protruding from the ice was a stone pillar, covered in intricate carvings unlike anything he had ever seen. The runes were not Norse, nor any other script known to him. "By Odin's eye," he breathed, reaching out to trace the alien symbols. "What is this?" Bjorn hobbled forward, his aged eyes gleaming with excitement. This, my friend, is evidence that we are not the first to walk these lands. These runes, they speak of ancient power, of secrets buried beneath the ice. Eric Bloodaxe, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward with a scowl. Secrets and mysteries are all well and good, old man, but how does this help us survive in this frozen wasteland? Before Bjorn could reply, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the ice, spreading outward from the stone pillar. The Vikings scrambled back as a section of the glacier face suddenly collapsed, revealing a dark opening. "A cave," Astrid whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her axe. Or a tunnel? Nadad peered into the darkness, feeling a pull that he couldn't explain. "We need to explore this," he declared. "Whatever secrets lie within might be the key to our survival here." Eric Bloodaxe snorted derisively. "Or our doom. We should seal it up and focus on practical matters." But Nadad could see the curiosity burning in the eyes of his fellow Vikings. The call of the unknown was too strong to ignore. "I'll lead a small team inside," he decided. "Astrid, Eric, Bjorn, you're with me. The rest of you stand guard and be ready for anything." As they prepared to enter the tunnel, gathering torches and weapons, a commotion at the edge of the settlement caught their attention. A lone frost giant approached, smaller than most they had encountered but no less imposing. "I am Scotty," the giantess announced, her voice like the cracking of glaciers. "Hunter of the Jutnar and guardian of these lands. You mortals tread on dangerous ground." Nadad stepped forward, bowing respectfully but standing his ground. "Great Scotty, we seek only knowledge. If these tunnels hold secrets that could help us understand your realm, would it not be better for us to learn?" Scotty's eyes narrowed, studying Nadad intently. "You are either very brave or very foolish, little Viking. But your words hold wisdom. I will accompany you on this journey. My knowledge may prove useful." With the unexpected addition of Scotty to their party, the group entered the dark tunnel. The air grew warmer as they descended, a stark contrast to the frigid world above. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in more of the strange runes they had seen on the pillar. As they ventured deeper, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Their torchlight revealed towering statues of beings that seemed neither giant nor human, their features alien and unsettling. "What manner of creatures are these?" Eric muttered, his usual bravado tempered by awe. Scotty's voice was hushed, almost reverent. "They are the Old Ones, the beings who walked these lands long before even the Jötnar came to power. We know little of them, save that their magic shaped the very foundations of our world." As they explored the cavern, Bjorn's excited voice echoed off the walls. "Look here, a great library of stone tablets." They gathered around a series of intricately carved slabs, each covered in the mysterious script. Bjorn ran his fingers over the engravings, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can decipher some of this," he said slowly. "It speaks of a great power, a force that binds the realms together, and a warning." Before he could elaborate, a low rumble filled the cavern. The ground began to shake, more violently than before. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. "We've triggered something," Astrid shouted over the noise. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to flee, they found their exit blocked. A section of the wall had slid away, revealing a hidden chamber, and within it, pulsing with an otherworldly light, was an object that made Nadad's heart race. "The Brisingamen," Scotty gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Freya's necklace. How came it to be here?" The legendary necklace of the goddess Freya hung suspended in the air, its gemstones glowing with an inner fire. As they watched, transfixed, tendrils of energy began to reach out from the artifact, probing the air around it. "We can't leave it here," Nadad decided, stepping towards the necklace. "Its power is too great, too dangerous." Eric grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Are you mad? That's the property of the gods. We have no right to take it." But Nadad shook him off, his eyes never leaving the Brisingamen. If it's here, it's because the gods willed it so. We were meant to find it. As his hand closed around the necklace, a surge of power coursed through him. Visions flashed before his eyes, the 9 realms in perfect balance, then thrown into chaos. He saw great battles, the fall of gods and giants alike, and a darkness that threatened to consume everything. The cavern shook more violently, and now streams of lava began to pour from cracks in the walls. The very air seemed charged with magical energy, reacting to the removal of the Brisingamen. "Run!" Scotty bellowed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The cavern is collapsing!" They raced back through the tunnels, the world crumbling around them. Nadad clutched the Brisingamen tightly, feeling its power pulse in sync with his racing heart. As they neared the exit, a massive boulder crashed down, nearly crushing Eric. Without thinking, Nadad reached out with his free hand, and a blast of energy shot from the necklace, disintegrating the boulder. Eric stared at him in shock and growing fear. They burst out of the tunnel just as it collapsed behind them, emerging into the cold air of Snaeland. The assembled Vikings and frost giants looked on in awe and terror as Nadad stood there, the legendary Brisingamen glowing in his grasp. For a moment, all was silent save for the howling wind. Then, with a roar of fury, a group of frost giants charged forward, led by none other than Thrym himself. "Thieves!" the frost giant king bellowed. "You dare to steal the treasures hidden in our realm? Your lives are forfeit!" Nadad raised the Brisingamen, its power forming a protective barrier around him and his companions. "We did not come as thieves," he shouted, his voice amplified by the necklace's magic. "But neither can we ignore the signs the gods have placed before us. This artifact has the power to reshape the very fabric of the realms. It cannot be left unguarded, nor can it fall into the wrong hands." Scotty stepped forward, placing herself between Nadad and her fellow giants. "He speaks the truth, Thrym. I witnessed it myself. The Old Ones left warnings of a coming darkness. Perhaps these mortals were sent by the Norns themselves to prevent a greater calamity." Thrym's eyes narrowed, his icy breath coming in angry bursts. "And who are you to decide the fate of such power, little Viking? What gives you the right?" Nadad looked down at the Brisingamen, feeling its energy course through him. He knew that his next words would shape not just their fate, but potentially the fate of all the realms. "I claim no right," he said finally, his voice carrying across the icy plain. "Only a responsibility, to my people, to your people, and to all who call the 9 realms home. The Brisingamen has chosen to reveal itself now, in this time of uneasy peace between our kinds. Perhaps it is a sign that we must work together to face whatever darkness looms on the horizon." A tense silence fell over the assembled crowd. Vikings and frost giants alike waited with bated breath to see how Thrym would respond. The fate of 2 races and perhaps all the realms hung in the balance. As the wind howled around them and the power of the Brisingamen pulsed like a living heartbeat, Nadad stood firm. He had come to Snaeland seeking adventure and glory. Instead, he found himself at the center of a cosmic drama, holding an artifact of the gods and facing down beings of legend. Whatever came next, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The true test of his leadership, his courage, and his vision for a future where mortals and giants could coexist was just beginning. And as he met Thrym's icy gaze, the Brisingamen glowing with otherworldly power in his grasp, Nadad silently vowed to see this saga through to its end, no matter the cost. The standoff between Nadad and Thrym seemed to stretch for an eternity, the fate of 2 worlds hanging in the balance. The Brisingamen pulsed with otherworldly energy in Nadad's grasp, its power barely contained. Suddenly the sky above them darkened. Thunder rolled across the icy plains and bolts of lightning struck the ground around them. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed from the heavens. "Enough!" All eyes turned skyward as a figure descended from the storm clouds. Tall and majestic, with a flowing white beard and a gleaming spear in his hand, there was no mistaking his identity. "Odin All-Father," Nadad breathed, sinking to one knee. The god's single eye swept over the assembled Vikings and frost giants, his expression unreadable. "You meddle with forces beyond your understanding, mortals and Jötnar alike," he intoned. "The Brisingamen was hidden for a reason, and now its power threatens to tear the very fabric of the realms asunder." Thrym, his earlier rage replaced by a wary respect, stepped forward. "Great Odin, these mortals trespass in our domain and steal our treasures. Surely you cannot condone such actions." Odin's eye flashed dangerously. "And you, Thrym, king of frost giants, do you claim ownership over artifacts of the gods? The Brisingamen belongs to Freya, and its presence here raises questions that concern all the realms." As if summoned by her name, a second figure appeared beside Odin in a shimmer of golden light. Freya, the goddess of love and war, her beauty as terrible as it was magnificent. "My necklace," she said, her voice like honey and steel combined. "Lost for eons and now found by a mortal in the depths of Jotunheim. The Norns work in mysterious ways indeed." Nadad, still kneeling, held out the Brisingamen. "Great Freya, I claim no ownership of your treasure. We found it hidden in ancient ruins, guarded by magic beyond our understanding." As Freya reached for the necklace, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. Cracks appeared in the ice, steam and fire erupting from the depths. The very land itself seemed to be tearing apart. "It's too late," Odin growled. "The removal of the Brisingamen has destabilized the magical foundations of this realm. Ragnarok stirs in its slumber." Panic spread through both Viking and frost giant ranks. Ragnarok, the prophesied end of all things, had been a distant legend. Now, it seemed all too real. Astrid pushed her way to Nadad's side. "There must be something we can do," she insisted, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "We caused this. We must make it right." Nadad nodded, rising to his feet. He turned to Odin and Freya, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Great ones, we may be mortal, but we are not without courage or resourcefulness. Tell us how we can help avert this catastrophe." Odin and Freya exchanged a look, seeming to communicate without words. Finally, Odin spoke. "The Brisingamen must be returned to its resting place, deep within the heart of Snaeland. But the journey will be perilous, for the very elements rage against us. It will take the combined efforts of both Viking and Jötnar to succeed." Thrym bristled at the suggestion. "Work alongside these mortals, they who have brought this calamity upon us? And you would doom all the realms with your pride?" Freya challenged, her eyes flashing. "The old magics care not for your petty grievances. United you stand a chance. Divided, all is lost." As if to emphasize her words, a massive fissure opened in the ice, nearly swallowing a group of Vikings and frost giants alike. Without hesitation, Nadad leapt into action, using the power of the Brisingamen to create a bridge of pure energy across the gap. Thrym, seeing the mortals in peril, instinctively reached out with his icy powers to reinforce the bridge. For a moment, Viking and frost giant stood side by side, their combined efforts saving lives on both sides. It was a glimpse of what could be achieved if they set aside their differences. "You see?" Odin said, a hint of approval in his voice. "Together, you are capable of great things. Now you must channel that unity towards a greater purpose." Nadad turned to Thrym, extending his hand. "What say you, king of the frost giants? Shall we write a new saga together, one of cooperation rather than conflict?" Thrym hesitated, centuries of mistrust warring with the urgent need of the moment. Finally, he grasped Nadad's hand in his massive grip. "For the sake of all realms, we will join forces. But know this, Viking. If you betray us, the wrath of the Jötnar will be the least of your concerns." With the alliance tentatively formed, Odin outlined their mission. The Brisingamen needed to be returned to an ancient temple hidden beneath the great glacier, but the path would be fraught with danger, as the unleashed magical energies had awakened creatures long dormant. "I will guide you as best I can," Freya said, her form already beginning to fade. "But the laws that bind the gods prevent us from intervening directly. This task falls to you, mortals, and Jötnar." As the gods vanished, returning to Asgard to prepare for the potential onset of Ragnarok, Nadad turned to the assembled group. Vikings and frost giants alike looked to him, awaiting direction in this moment of crisis. "We move now," he declared, the Brisingamen glowing at his throat. "Every moment we delay brings us closer to doom. Astrid, Eric, Bjorn, you're with me. Thrym, choose your strongest and wisest to join us. The rest, do what you can to stabilize the settlement and prepare for anything." As they set out towards the great glacier, the world around them descended into chaos. The sky churned with unnatural storms, raining fire and ice in equal measure. The ground heaved and split, revealing glimpses of the fiery realm that lay beneath the frozen surface of Snaeland. Their progress was slow and treacherous. More than once, they had to combine their skills to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Eric's strength and Astrid's agility complemented the raw power of the frost giants. Bjorn's knowledge of runes proved invaluable in deciphering ancient markers that pointed their way. As they neared the heart of the glacier, a bone-chilling roar echoed through the ice. A massive shape, long and serpentine, burst from a nearby fissure. "Jörmungandr!" Thrym bellowed, genuine fear in his voice. "The world serpent awakens." The great beast, said to encircle the entire world, fixed its ancient eyes upon the group. Its gaze fell upon the Brisingamen, and a look of recognition passed over its serpentine features. "Children of Midgard and Jotunheim," it spoke, its voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "You carry that which was hidden for good reason. Its power calls to the old magics, stirring forces best left dormant." Nadad stepped forward, the Brisingamen pulsing at his throat. "Great Jörmungandr, we seek to return the necklace to its resting place and prevent Ragnarok. Will you aid us in this quest?" The world serpent regarded them silently for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, it began to laugh, a sound like avalanches and crashing waves combined. "Prevent Ragnarok, foolish mortals. Ragnarok is not merely an event, but a cycle. It cannot be prevented, only postponed, but—" It paused, its ancient eyes gleaming with something like curiosity. "Perhaps that is enough. To delay the end of all things, even for a short while. Yes, that may be a worthy endeavor." With a sinuous motion, Jörmungandr lowered its massive head. "Climb upon my scales, children of two realms. I shall bear you to the temple with haste. But be warned, even I cannot long withstand the forces that now awaken. You must be swift in your task." As they clambered onto the world serpent's back, Nadad felt a surge of hope. With Jörmungandr's aid, they might yet succeed in their mission. But as they sped towards the heart of the great glacier, he couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The temple, when they finally reached it, was a sight to behold. Carved into the very heart of the glacier, its ice walls gleamed with an inner light that pulsed in time with the Brisingamen. Ancient runes, more complex than any Bjorn had ever seen, covered every surface. "The lock that seals away the old magics," Thrym murmured, a hint of awe in his voice. "Our most ancient legends speak of this place." As they entered the temple's main chamber, a voice echoed from the depths, not a physical sound, but a resonance that vibrated in their very souls. "Who dares disturb the slumber of ages?" the voice intoned. "Who brings the key to unlock the powers that must remain chained?" Nadad stepped forward, the Brisingamen blazing with light. "We come to return what was taken, to restore the balance and delay Ragnarok." A figure materialized before them, neither god, nor giant, nor mortal, but something older and more primordial. Its form shifted constantly as if unable to settle on a single shape. "The cycle cannot be broken," the being said, its voice like the whisper of entropy itself. "But perhaps it can be extended. Place the necklace upon the altar, mortal, and we shall see if your actions this day are enough to stave off the twilight of the gods." As Nadad moved to place the Brisingamen on the icy altar, He felt the weight of all 9 realms upon his shoulders. In this moment, the fate of existence itself hung in the balance, dependent on the actions of a Viking explorer who had sought only adventure and glory. With a deep breath, he removed the necklace and laid it gently upon the altar. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a flash of blinding light and a sound like the birth of a universe, the Brisingamen sank into the ice, its power spreading out in waves that shook the very foundations of Yggdrasil itself. The primordial being nodded, a look of something like approval on its ever-shifting features. It is done. The cycle is reset, the old magics contained once more. Ragnarok sleeps again, though for how long, even I cannot say. As the being faded from view, Nadod turned to his companions, Viking and frost giant alike. They had done it. Against all odds, they had postponed the end of the world, but as the adrenaline of their quest faded, a new reality set in. They were stranded in the heart of Snaeland, far from home, with the very fabric of reality still settling around them. The adventure that had brought them to this frozen land was far from over. In fact, Nadod realized as he met the eyes of his comrades, it was only just beginning. The saga of Nadod and his crew had taken an unexpected turn, becoming intertwined with the fate of all the realms. As they prepared to make their way back to the surface, to face whatever new world awaited them, Nadod knew that their greatest challenges, and perhaps their greatest triumphs, still lay ahead. The journey back to the surface was a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Nadod, Astrid, Eric, Bjorn, and their frost giant allies emerged from the depths of the great glacier to find a world transformed. The chaotic storms had subsided, leaving behind a landscape that was both familiar and alien. As they crested the final ridge overlooking their settlement, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The modest collection of Viking longhouses and Jötnar ice structures had been transformed. In the center of the settlement stood a massive hall, its walls a seamless blend of wood and enchanted ice, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "By Thor's hammer," Eric breathed, his eyes wide with awe. "What manner of sorcery is this?" Thrym, the frost giant king, let out a rumbling chuckle. "Not sorcery, Viking. This is the work of our peoples, united in purpose. Behold the fruits of cooperation between mortal and Jötnar." As they descended into the settlement, they were greeted by a chorus of cheers from Vikings and frost giants alike. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of celebration. It seemed that in their absence, a miraculous change had taken place. Astrid grabbed the arm of a passing Viking, her voice urgent. "What happened here? How long were we gone?" The man looked at her in confusion. "Gone? You've been here all along, Shield Maiden. It's been 3 moons since the great storm when you and Nadod led us in building this new home." Nadod exchanged bewildered glances with his companions. 3 moons had passed, yet to them it felt like mere hours since they had entered the heart of the glacier. The primordial being's words echoed in his mind. The cycle is reset. It seemed that in averting Ragnarok, they had altered the very flow of time itself. As they made their way through the bustling settlement, Nadod marveled at the changes. Vikings and frost giants worked side by side, their skills complementing each other in ways he could never have imagined. The harsh environment of Snaeland, once their greatest enemy, had become a source of strength and innovation. They reached the great hall, its doors swinging open to reveal an interior that took Nadod's breath away. The ceiling soared impossibly high, supported by pillars of living ice that pulsed with an inner light. At the far end, 2 thrones stood side by side, one of intricately carved wood, the other of shimmering ice. "Welcome home, Nadod Sveinsson," a familiar voice boomed. Bjorn the seer stepped forward, but this was not the frail old man they remembered. He stood tall and strong, his eyes gleaming with the wisdom of ages. "We've been expecting you." "Bjorn?" Nadod asked, his voice thick with confusion. "How is this possible? You were with us in the glacier." The seer smiled enigmatically. Time is a river with many branches, my friend. What you experienced in the heart of Snaeland has rippled outward, changing the course of our saga. Come, there is much to discuss. As they gathered around a massive table laden with food and drink, Bjorn explained the new reality they had awakened to. In this timeline, Nadad and his companions had indeed returned from the depths of the glacier as heroes, bearing wisdom that had united Viking and Jötnar in common purpose. The settlement had flourished, becoming a beacon of cooperation between the realms. But what of our memories? Astrid asked, her brow furrowed. We remember a different path, a desperate quest to return the Brisingamen. Bjorn nodded sagely. You bear the memories of both timelines, a gift and a burden. It falls to you to guide us forward, armed with the knowledge of what might have been and what now is. As the night wore on and the celebration continued around them, Nadad found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the hall. There, he found Thrym, the frost giant king, deep in contemplation. Heavy thoughts, Thrym? Nadad asked, taking a seat beside the massive figure. Thrym turned to him, his icy eyes unreadable. I find myself at a crossroads, Viking. In one set of memories, we are bitter enemies. In another, steadfast allies. Which path do we follow? Nadad considered his words carefully before responding. Perhaps we follow neither path but forge a new one. We've been given a rare gift, the chance to build a future with the wisdom of multiple pasts. A smile, as rare as a summer's day in Snaeland, crossed Thrym's face. Well spoken, Nadad. It seems the Norns chose wisely when they set you upon this path. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the hall's entrance. A group of Vikings, their clothes travel-worn and their faces etched with wonder, were being led inside. Nadad, one of them called out, pushing through the crowd. By the gods, it's really you. Nadad recognized the man, Gunnar, one of the crew members from the Raven's Wing who had stayed behind when they first landed in Snaeland. Gunnar? How did you find us? Gunnar's eyes were wide with excitement. We followed the tales, Nadad. Word of your deeds has spread across the northern seas. They speak of a new land, a realm where Viking and Jötnar live in harmony. We had to see it for ourselves. As Nadad listened to Gunnar's tale, he realized the true scope of what they had accomplished. Their saga had become legend, drawing explorers and adventurers from across the Viking world to this new frontier. With this realization came a sense of both pride and trepidation. They had built something miraculous here in Snaeland, but with growth came new challenges. How would they maintain the delicate balance between Viking and Jötnar culture? How would they protect their new home from those who might seek to exploit its riches? Astrid, sensing Nadad's conflicted thoughts, approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone in this, you know, she said softly. We all bear the weight of our two histories. Together we'll find a way forward. Nadad nodded, drawing strength from her presence. He raised his voice, calling for attention from the assembled crowd. Friends, allies, fellow explorers, he began, his voice carrying across the now hushed hall. We stand at the dawn of a new age. Snaeland is no longer just a harsh wilderness to be conquered, but a home to be nurtured, a place where the best of Viking and Jötnar traditions can flourish together. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, human and giant alike. All turned to him with rapt attention. But with this new beginning comes great responsibility. We must be vigilant, not just against the threats of this harsh land, but against the darkness that can grow in our own hearts. Greed, mistrust, the desire for power. These are the true enemies we must guard against. Thrym stood, his massive form towering over the assembly. The Viking speaks truth, he rumbled. For too long, our peoples have been divided by fear and misunderstanding. Now, we have the chance to show the 9 realms what can be achieved when we stand united. A cheer went up from the crowd, the sound of it shaking the very foundations of the great hall. In that moment, Nadad felt a surge of hope for the future they were building. As the celebration resumed with renewed vigor, Nadad found himself drawn to the hall's entrance. He stepped outside, breathing in the crisp, cold air of Snaeland. The aurora danced across the star-filled sky, a reminder of the magic that pulsed through this land. He thought of the long journey that had brought them here, the storms they had weathered, the battles they had fought, the mysteries they had unraveled. And yet, he knew that in many ways, their true adventure was only just beginning. From the shadows, a familiar figure emerged, Bjorn the Seer, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "What do you see in our future, old friend?" Nadad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Bjorn smiled, his gaze turned to the horizon. "I see a saga that will be told for generations to come. A tale of courage, of unity, of the indomitable spirit of both Viking and Jötnar. But remember, Nadad, the future is not set in stone. It is shaped by the choices we make, day by day, moment by moment." As if to emphasize his words, a shooting star blazed across the sky, a sign of change, of new beginnings. Nadad nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He thought of the two sets of memories he carried, one of desperate struggle, the other of hard-won cooperation. Both would guide him in the days to come. "Then let us make those choices wisely," he said, his voice filled with determination. "For the sake of Snaeland, for our peoples, and for all the realms that watch our progress." As he turned to rejoin the celebration, Nadad cast one last look at the vast, untamed wilderness that stretched beyond their settlement. Snaeland had changed them all, Viking and Jötnar alike, and in turn, they would change Snaeland, forging a legacy that would echo through the ages. The saga of Nadad and his crew had taken an unexpected turn, becoming a tale of two timelines merged into one extraordinary future. As the sounds of laughter and song drifted out from the great hall, Nadad allowed himself a moment of pride. They had not just discovered a new land, they had birthed a new world, one where the boundaries between myth and reality, between mortal and giant, blurred and shifted like the ever-changing ice of Snaeland itself. With a smile on his face and purpose in his heart, Nadad stepped back into the warmth of the hall, ready to write the next chapter in their ongoing saga, a tale of unity, discovery, and the enduring spirit of the Northmen.